debate on that. Anyway, good morning, distinguished panelists, and good morning, Professor Mohan, Leon, and Dr. Arama from New Zealand. On my behalf, we have Dr. Kulwin Tehran and Dr. Burusova here with us this morning, apart from myself. My role this morning is to just briefly set the pace for the hub-to-hub dialogue. Both of us in different ways have experienced forms of colonization, while India experienced an extractive colonization. New Zealand is a kind of a settlement colonization. But the later demographic shift in New Zealand and the complete, extraction of the British citizens from India and a large population in India, which is now contending with its own, problems of nation, and it's addressing its various issues. So there is a common strand, but that common strand cannot necessarily mean that we will have common frames of discussion. When I talked to Mohan, a few weeks ago, we had a range of topics that we would come to terms with and narrow on one or two for this particular session. And finally, we agreed that we will focus on issues of research in advocacy, activism, and perhaps by implication and policy frameworks as well. I can't make a comprehensive comment on the cumulative impact of research either in our discipline or the broader area of social sciences and humanities. That will take a very long course of action on my side. However, we have had, at least in the Indian context, a few interventions wherein research has guided certain policy and as well as judicial interventions in terms of the marginalized and the deprived sections of our societies. There are, of course, different aspects of inequity that the world is addressing, and inequities may not necessarily always be economic. It might be social, it might be deliberate marginalization, and issues of inclusivity, etc., are also involved. So the theme of this morning's session is first of its kind as far as the ICA regional hub India is concerned, and we also anticipate that it will be the future direction for us, where a lot of hub-to-hub activities can go on, taking advantage of the virtual spaces that we have now at our command, and encourage. Okay, so without much talking much on this particular issue, I would now request Dr. Mohan to offer his opening remarks, and the order of presentation will be after Mohan makes his opening remarks. We will have Professor Kanchan from our side, and after the New Zealand resource person, we will have Dr. Borosova, and back to New Zealand, and then followed by Dr. Kulwin. This will be the sequence of discussion, and also we will have about 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully, for interaction from our online participants, as well as people in the audience, both in India and New Zealand. Over to you, Dr. Mohan, and greetings once again from the ICA Regional Hub. Dr. Mohan, you are on.
Namaskar, Salam Alaikum. I begin by acknowledging Rangitane, the people of this land whose struggles and whose wisdom shape the very spaces in which we can have these conversations. And it's also an ongoing reminder that processes of decolonization are materially grounded in land struggles and in struggles against forces of colonialism and imperialism that are very much alive and kicking at this point. So I'll take about 7 to 8 minutes to offer some reflections and then offer it back to you. First of all, I just wanted to say hi to all the Indian colleagues. Great to see you. Um, Kanchan, great to see you. All of you, great. And we have had ongoing conversations, so I see this as part of the ongoing conversations, and great to be able to bring our colleagues from Aotearoa into these conversations as well. So, communication for social change, the way in which I understand communication for social change is through my work with the culture-centered approach, or what's called the CCA. Now, the CCA articulates a theory of communication for social change that is based upon three key concepts. The first concept is the concept of communicative inequality, inequality in the distribution of a range of communication resources, all the way from information to voice to participation in democracy to decision making, and arguing that there are systemic patterns in terms of how communicative inequalities map material inequalities, and these often reflect broader structural forces such as forces of settler colonialism, forces of imperialism, forces of racial capitalism in the context of India caste, forces of patriarchy, as well as cis-normativity that shape the ways in which societies are organized, and therefore, in that sense, the ways in which people do or do not have access to communicative resources. So the CCA then asks the question, what does it mean for communities that have systematically been erased from discursive spaces to experience these processes of erasure? And it offers a concept called voice infrastructures. Voice infrastructures refers to materials, resources, architectures for voice through which communities can participate in decision-making processes. Now, historically then, in theorizing communication for social change, the CCA explores the ways in which communities that have historically been marginalized can work hand in hand with organizing forms, with academic structures, as well as with various forms of civil society organizations to build these voice infrastructures through which they can mobilize for social change. Now, in the context of, I direct a center that does its work based upon these tenets of the culture-centered approach, and the center is called CARE, the Center for Culture-Centered Approach to Research and Evaluation, and we do work both in Aotearoa and India as well. We have community researchers in both these spaces, alongside multiple other countries where our researchers do this work. It's a real difficulty. There is. We'll keep going and see how we go. Okay. So, I will drop on some of the threads that are evident in this work in terms of voice infrastructures. First is that communities that have historically been disenfranchised always already enact their agency. They don't need academics to come and teach them how to enact agency and how to participate in change processes. That's a core concept of the CCA in terms of communication for social change. So the CCA really asks this question, how do we learn to listen, drawing from Gayatri Spivak, to ways of articulation in communities such that, and this is the contribution that CCA makes, such that the voices can be heard in ways that are meaningful. So that part, voices can be heard in ways that are meaningful, is really critical. That means that the voices can be heard in ways that they can make an impact on social policy, that can make an impact on the ways in which economic resources are distributed, that can make an impact on the ways in which opportunities are organized in societies. So in the work of building these voice infrastructures, then the concept of securing and securing connections becomes a critical concept, particularly in terms of how do struggles at the margins connect with each other to mobilize alongside each other to build these social change processes, such that social change processes are broadly held in collectives rather than in individualized compartments within which change can be constituted. And in that sense, CCA also offers a critique of explicitly identity-based movements, arguing that concepts of identity have to fundamentally be connected to questions of class and questions of capitalist organizing, and fundamentally asking how do we think about the ways, for instance, communities can work alongside unions, alongside trade union movements, alongside left party politics to build these infrastructures for voice. And one of the things there we see is the ways in which often identity itself, devoid of that material analysis and that material struggle, becomes a point of elite capture, where elites in any particular society or movement, whether it is in the context of, say, caste, or whether it is in the context of race or ethnicity, whether it is in the context of gender, capture the resources that are available in order to make particular kinds of argument to gain or secure mobility for themselves, while actually the vast majority of those who are marginalized continue to stay marginalized. So as a theory for social change, then CCA broadly is interested in the question, how can these structures be fundamentally transformed? So we talk about structural transformation, such that the ways of organizing of society can fundamentally be shifted in ways that are meaningful. Now I will wrap up with a little bit of commentary on the ways in which my work here particularly engages the Indian diaspora and the Indian community that we'll find really meaningful. So one of the things my work has increasingly been concerned about is the rise of Hindutva, the far-right ideology of Hindu nationhood that is a widespread challenge across the diaspora, including here in Aotearoa, that becomes a highly marginalizing frame for various India's minorities, including Dalits, including Muslims, including Christians. So what does it mean to listen to those voices that are systematically disenfranchised as the narrative of a Hindu nation takes up much of the Indian space here? And in that particular context, much of my writing also increasingly has been dedicated to exploring questions of the ways in which Indians relate to Maori sovereignty and struggles for Maori sovereignty and Tiruranga Tiratanga. And one of the concerning features is the extent of racism, for instance, that Indians hold toward Maori Gatanga Whenua, circulating often colonial tropes such as the lazy Maori or the overly sexualized Maori or the Maori on welfare that continues to demonstrate the architectures of the caste system. So one of the questions in terms of social change that I've been interested in is that how do we rupture these spaces to voice infrastructures, to build voice infrastructures that can craft solidarities rather than drawing upon identity and identity politics, and particularly leveraging diversity, equity, inclusion on one hand, and on the other hand to power down on those communities that are the people of the land. So I will leave you with that. I think there's a lot for us to think through and converse about in terms of how we craft politics of communication for social change. Namaste. Back to you, Professor Sanjay.
Yes. Professor Kanchan, can you come in? Professor Kanchan?
Yes, yes. Am I audible? And yeah. All right.
Go ahead, Ma.
Should I
You're
start?
on.
Yeah. All right. It's always a pleasure to listen to Professor Datta. Our work and approach aligns in several ways. He knows about the work that we are doing. So let me start by saying good morning to everyone and good afternoon to people in New Zealand. It's a real pleasure to join the Hub to Hub panel and this conversation on communication for social change in Kherwa and Bharat at the ICA Manipal Regional Hub 2025. I had a presentation, but I think I'll just go with the text. Or is it possible to also share the presentation? Um, does that work? Okay, I think I'll skip that and I'll go with what I have here with me.
And you
So at
can,
the outset,
Kanchan, you
okay.
can do the presentation if you wish, or if you're more comfortable with the text, anything that you prefer, right? Thank you.
I'm okay with both, so
All
you
right.
let me know if it's okay to share.
Okay, go ahead with your oral presentation, that would be fine, okay? Go ahead.
All right, okay. I'm just trying to share, but is it visible?
It's visible, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's go. Yeah, we will. Since I created it, it'll be useful to have some of the thoughts on the screen also. So at the outset, I'd like to thank ICA Regional Hub team for curating such a meaningful global exchange. I'm especially grateful to Professor Shubha, Director of Manipal Institute of Communication, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, for inviting me, and Professor B.P. Sanjay for conceptualizing and coordinating this hub along with Professor Datta. So I'm speaking today from an Indian perspective, and I bring to this conversation some 2 decades plus of experience and learning, both as a researcher and an enthusiast in the field of community media. Much of my work, as many of you know here, and all my interactions are focused on community radio, which I see as a crucial democratic space where communication becomes a tool of participation, social transformation, and empowerment, and not just information delivery. Something that Professor Datta was referring to also, places where voices are heard in ways that are meaningful. In India, the question of who communicates, how, and why, or what to what end is not simply a media issue. It is a developmental and a democratic concern. Our national vision, which is framed and guided by Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas, calls for collective progress through collective efforts and participatory pathways. These aspirations cannot be achieved through one-way diffusion alone or built through centralized top-down communication. They require local, locally driven, inclusive, community-led systems. In other words, what we need is community communication. Community communication that is locally embedded, responsive to marginalized voices that haven't been heard, and geared to be inclusive in both what Professor Datta was referring to, also in both voice and in structure. Community communication, if we look at it in India, is more than just an alternative to mainstream media. Professor Datta was referring to voice infrastructures. We look at it also as a critical social infrastructure. It is local, sometimes hyperlocal, and rooted in lived experiences, especially in our vast, diverse, and multilingual society. When mass media often speak to people, community media engages and speaks with them, valuing pluralism and participation. It creates space for dialogue and not just dissemination. Across the country, we are seeing hybrid communication and media ecosystems evolve, where community radio, WhatsApp groups, podcasts, folk media, and video storytelling intersect to shape grassroots narratives and serve local needs. In these spaces, people become not just consumers of content and media, but producers of knowledge. In our research over several decades, we have observed this, this participation across distinctive regions of India, from the drought-affected villages of Bundelkhand, the remote valley of Uttarakhand, and the conflict-sensitive zones of Jharkhand, to the cyclone-prone coastal belts of Tamil Nadu and Odisha, the resilient floodplains of eastern India, and culturally rich borderlands and hills of the northeast. Another striking example is of rural women becoming what are called Suchanapreneurs, that is information and entrepreneurs. They are not merely accessing digital tools, but producing and sharing information in culturally resonant ways. Such grassroots initiatives help to address the digital divide and to some extent also misinformation. And it signifies a profound shift from women being perceived as beneficiaries to becoming agents of social change. This brings me to two groups that I consider central to transformation: women and youth. In my research, particularly through community radio case studies, I've documented how women broadcasters are not only bringing new topics to the airwaves, but are redefining whose voices matter. When women take charge of grassroots media, they don't just speak, they reclaim spaces. When women co create media, they don't just tell stories, they shape agendas and they make the development discourse more responsive and inclusive. Their involvement makes content gender sensitive as they creatively weave discussions on health, domestic violence, livelihoods, political participation, girls' education into the programming, often for the very first time. Meanwhile, youth in India are creating their own communicative publics, not limited by geography. Whether it's climate advocacy through podcasts, digital collectives about mental health, or heritage preservation on Instagram, young people are framing what interest-based civic networks using social media. Through such communities of practice like urban cyclists, heritage conservationists, grassroots innovators, young Indians they are turning personal experiences into public engagement. Now, this transformation doesn't happen automatically. It demands capacity building to some extent and structural shifts. Our challenge is to support them, not just with platforms, but with ecosystems that enable long-term ownership and agency. This participatory ethos that we are talking about must extend also to research, policy, and advocacy. Too often, communication research in India and other parts of the world has been extractive, studying communities without meaningfully involving or including them in the process. What we need instead is for social change practice, research, or policy to be participatory by design, where community members are not just respondents, but collaborators. We must shift to co-created knowledge systems where community members help define the research, co-analyze the data, and also benefit from the findings. Communities are a researcher's partners, they are not subjects. So similarly, policy must also reflect this shift. We need advocacy frameworks that recognize and institutionalize community media, whether it's curriculum design under NEP also or outreach via Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. Community communication should be an integral part of the design, funding, and training, not just an afterthought. To achieve this vision, we need to rethink how we train the next generation of communicators. This generation would, of course, need to know multimedia storytelling, podcasting, digital technology, and the skills. But equally important, and perhaps more important, they must learn skills such as listening deeply, communicating across languages and cultures, facilitating community dialogue and conflict resolution, enabling stakeholder engagement. Again, these are not just communication skills, these are social competencies. Therefore, education must move beyond the classroom into the community, offering real-world, immersive, and grounded learning. Though India and Aotearoa differ in scale, we share a deep commitment to communication that is rooted in justice and accountability, and Professor Datta also referred to it just now. India's indigenous communities, Adivasis, forest dwellers, pastoral groups, they have long relied on oral stories, collective memory, traditional ecological knowledge as core forms of communication and cultural community. These communicative practices much like those of the Maori communities, remind us that communication for social change is deeply rooted in land, language, and lived relationships. I deeply respect New Zealand's commitment to mana whenua, please correct me if I'm wrong, led communication and bicultural frameworks. In India, our equivalent lie in Panchayati Raj, decentralized media initiatives, oral traditions, and participatory development frameworks. These are all terrains for dialogue, mutual learning, and co-design. Though we differ in context, we share common imperative to design communication systems that are accountable to people and communities, especially those included from the dominant discourse. So, to return to the core of the theme of the ICA conference, Disrupting and Consolidating Communication Research, let me say that community communication doesn't just disrupt, it reorients towards equity, towards dignity and collective well-being. To us in Bharat, India, it offers not only a medium for centering those who have long been left out of the conversations, but a method for empowerment, for advocacy, and for building research that serves the people it studies. I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Kanchan, for that comment and also for the presentation as to how we can take the research to the community-centric perspective and also throwing some light on the issues that we face as researchers. We will continue. Professor Mohan, will it be Leon Salter now or are you going to... Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, India Hub. This is really cool that we've connected like this. I was just saying to Valerie before, like connecting periphery to periphery like this is such a good idea, especially with the political situation in the US right now. But yeah, I was just going to talk about my own work, because my own advocacy work has been in the space of precarity and academia. So I was a precarious academic worker post-PhD in 2020 when COVID hit. I don't know what the academic system is like in India, but here we have a kind of two-tier system where a lot of the teaching is being done by people on these fixed-term contracts with no kind of research component, and they're kind of treated a little bit like second-class citizens. And when COVID hit, we kind of got bringing it back to sort of Mohan CCA methodology. We kind of found we didn't really have a voice, either in our union or our universities. We didn't really, we weren't really even acknowledged with a name, the name that was given for the sort of like the time that you were post-PhD was early career scholar, with this kind of narrative that you were going to go into a postdoc and then you were going to go into a permanent job. But what we were finding in our group was that there weren't these postdocs and there weren't these permanent jobs to go into in the music industry, especially like post-COVID. When COVID hit, our university system was so reliant on international students, and then those kind of disappeared. And then the university started laying people off, and the union was really preoccupied with protecting their membership, which is mostly like the permanent academic jobs, which is kind of understandable. But then what kind of didn't really get highlighted was all the temporary and fixed term jobs that were being shed by the universities in kind of silence. So yeah, we got together as an advocacy group, Tertiary Education Action Group Aotearoa. And yeah, and bringing it back to what Mohan was saying about community, that felt kind of more, even though we're all researchers, that kind of felt more ethically sound for me as doing research and advocacy in our community, because we did the first ever survey of precarious academic workers. We got about 700 participants, and yeah, the findings were just really stark of just how the levels of exploitation. And yeah, we really found a collective voice from that, and now
through that mahi, through that work, we've the precarity is becoming, although it's very slow and it's kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, precarity is at least being recognised as an issue in the sector. Like when MB do reports on what the problems are in the sector, they'll recognise precarity as an issue, whereas they didn't before. So yeah, just bringing it back to sort of like having like communicative inequality and erasure of voice, that we're finally kind of like having our voice recognised. Yeah, and so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because Mohan wanted me to talk a little bit about unions and the situation here, and we're kind of constantly battling a bit with the conservatism of unions here, and both with our kind of Manawhanua communities and our migrant communities, it's kind of, unions are still a little bit very like kind of white. I don't know if you find this the same, Alama. Like the leadership at least is still quite white and male, and we don't really see the Māori communities kind of reflected in that leadership. And even though there is progress there, like our union, the TU, is the first union that's being treaty-led. There's and they're installing a co-governance structure, which is great. At the same time, they're still not really like addressing that precarity issue, which affects Māori and Pacifica more, excludes Māori and Pacifica from coming into academia. It makes it even more of an unwelcoming space. So yeah, still a long way to go there, I think. Yeah, that's me. Kia ora.
Back to you, Professor Sanjay.
Now I request our colleague, Professor Burushova Dasgupta, to make present his views or perspective on the topic. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sanjay. Thank you, Professor Datta, and others present here. Just to continue with what Professor Kanchan had said, that yes, India's Communication for Social Change, or CSC, if we put it that way, it is more grassroots. It is not basically tied down to, academic exercise, or what has happened is it has a long tradition of, having movements from the grassroots itself. I mean, like the most notable one we had seen, say in the 80s, when we found, the people protesting against the conditions applied to the World Bank development loans. We did see that. And then in the 90s and 2000, we saw the great movement of the RTI, the right to information, which started from a village in Rajasthan, and it was led by, that's also very gender sensitive. We had Aruna Roy, who was who resigned from his, executive post, the IS post, and became the leader of the movement. And that was a movement which rose from the grassroots and then made a policy change. It moved towards, it became an act in 2005, and that was a very successful, you can say, communication for social change. And in recent times, we still have a lot of agitation on CAA, the Citizens Act, and that is something which has a lot of agitation, lot of protests in it, because it's supposed to be discriminatory. It has included, protection, citizenship for 6 religious sects, like the Sikhs, the Hindus, the Buddhists, Jains, and the Christians, but not the Muslims. So those are these are movements which are rising from the grassroots level. So we need to watch the movements, how it operates, and our communication also, the process has to follow that. We can't keep say, our, the communication for social change restricted to our classrooms or to the, the academic models. We will have to move towards a greater integration between what the people want. If we are really interested in changes, social change, we will have to look for the voices which come from below. And that has happened. I mean, in many cases, especially the RTI, which we have talked about, that has happened. And it has had a lot of, initial, there was hesitancy in the media to be covered, but it has been later, it has been covered. It went to the Supreme Court, and there are a lot of coverages on the right to information. And the CAA is also, has been a continuous process of, in media also we have seen a lot of coverages on this. It may be, you can say it may be political, but it's in India, you can't remain in silos. It has to be the political, the social, the cultural, everything will come together. Yes, it has its role. If we stick to this, it can be amplified. It amplifies the marginalized voice, the voices of. We have the subalterns in, say, the tribes and the minority religious communities. We have many differences within the society. It's a very large. If we compare with New Zealand, it's very focused. The movement, it says it's bicultural. But we can't, and India is multicultural. We have so many languages, we have so many cultures. Our movement in social change is very expansive, and we will have to follow. And we have lots to learn from New Zealand as well. Making it, the movement needs to have a focus, but at the same time, we can't leave out, in order to become focused a movement, we can't leave out the other communities or the other voices. So that needs to be looked into. But I will just add one more point and leave it at that. I've been to Australia, I've been to New Zealand, and I have a feeling, yes, there is a movement towards change. Giving the rightful place for the Aboriginals, and they don't mention that word, and giving them a position. But I have a feeling. My stay was very short, but I would like to. That's my curiosity. And there has been changes in names. For example, we are talking about. I find it very difficult to spell. Also, New Zealand as Aotearoa. Am I right? I'm sure I'm going wrong with the pronunciation. But there are many other things which have come to the surface. But this changes in nomenclature, changes in it. Really, it stays in the surface. I have seen it. We have seen it in India. We have changes in names from Bangalore to Bangalore, Calcutta to Kolkata, and Bombay to Mumbai, but that remains in the surface. Whether it really trickles down to the bottom, whether they are going into the, the spirit of the backward tribes, that is something, a question. It's a question for, the locals in New Zealand. It's a question, or which has to be raised by what purpose does it serve in changing names in India as well. So we have to be genuine in our look for, for the development of the people who are disadvantaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Burushiva. Mohan, will it be Dr. Arima?
Namihi Nui, kia ora. I'm handing over to Dr. Arima.
Kia ora tātou. It's lovely to be in conversation with you all on this lovely panel. There's been so many things that have been raised that I want to pick up on, so I'll try to do my best to do that. So some of the things that were discussed were around our communities and solidarities and the power of standing and advocating for one another from the margins, from positions where you're not necessarily in power. But I think that provides just wonderful opportunities to stand in solidarity with one another, because you're not doing it in a way that's paternalistic or tokenistic, but in ways of actually connecting your struggles, your experience of colonization, the ways in which colonization is not something that just happens locally, but is globally, and connecting all of those things. And as I have this discussion, I want to acknowledge particularly Ara Simmons, who I've been in many discussions with her PhD research looking at the experiences of South Asian women in Aotearoa. And so we quite often have lots of dialogues around this, and she'll be presenting, I think, tomorrow. So if you haven't put that in your diary, make sure you check that out. It will be a wonderful kōrero, I'm sure. So some of the things that Ara and I talk about as well are around the ways in which New Zealand has tried to escape its identity as a settler colony. So earlier, one of the presenters discussed the differences between extractive colonialism versus settler colonialism and the different dynamics that puts colonized people in. And so here in Aotearoa, Indigenous people were very limited in the types of resistance we could engage in. Obviously, we're demographically overwhelmed, and so any type of armed resistance would be violently crushed fairly quickly. But the state is still left with this problem of how do we rebrand ourselves as something other than a settler colony. And the way that the New Zealand state did that here was through the Treaty of Waitangi, our treaty signed between the British Crown and Māori rangatira leaders. And prior to this kind of international pressure to decolonise, the Treaty of Waitangi was dismissed as a legal nullity. But under this pressure, we suddenly see the New Zealand state start to put emphasis on this treaty, start to celebrate Waitangi Day. So the first celebration of Waitangi Day was held kind of following World War II. And since then, it has become something that Māori use strategically to try to, it's one of the only instruments that we have that actually gains any kind of traction to advance our rights. But the problem with that is that then we have this bicultural framing that was discussed earlier, which really erases the multicultural demographic reality that we live within, and people who are not white or Pākehā, as we call it here, feel very much excluded from that idea of biculturalism. And so when it comes to relationships with Māori, they seem to kind of get filtered through the Crown or filtered through European cultures, rather than there being spaces for Māori to engage meaningfully with other ethnic communities. And you know, when we have state funding for different things, there's always a Māori pot over here, and then a pot somewhere down the line, the crumbs of the crumbs are left over for different ethnic communities to fight over. And it does kind of create competition, but it also creates different funding pathways, and so it's very difficult for us to do things together that are things that are funded. We have to find ways of doing that in community that are not funded. Yes, and I think another thing that Ara discusses in her work as well is the way in which ethnic categorization occurs in Aotearoa. So we have the main ethnic categories that people are like divided in through by our official statistics categorizes all Asian people in one category, and so that really obscures the inequality within that category. And I think it obscures a lot of the shared class interests that Māori have with South Asian communities as well. Quite often Māori will say, you know, we're at the bottom of every type of social indicator of well-being, but a different conversation might be had if South Asian, if there were different categorizations. So if we went down to the next level of categorization, we might understand more about our shared class interests. What also tends to happen is kind of, you know, oppression Olympics, where people are racialized in different ways, and it then kind of becomes this rather than understanding that, that it's a system, it racializes people to the detriment of all of us, but that it shows up very differently. And so, at the lower income brackets, we have Māori and Indian communities forced into close proximity in impoverished neighbourhoods. And then for those who kind of access higher income jobs, we have a different type of racialization that happens at that echelon of society, where a lot of institutions allow only a little success. They'll have like the token DEI representation of different ethnic groups, and Māori certainly come into that. So there becomes this kind of fetishization of Indigenous people who have. For myself, I can talk about my own experience. Nobody was interested in anything about me until I was university educated, and then suddenly everybody wants to hold you up as the example of we can't be a racist country. Look, we have this person who counters that narrative, and so there's this kind of fetishization that happens, and it becomes like a performance for kind of white liberals. I do think that despite all of that, there are some really powerful organisers, people like Anu Kaloti, who is involved with migrant union organising, who always speaks powerfully about challenging those kind of racist stereotypes that are that we see circulating in society. And I think those types of solidarities are incredibly important, powerful. I recently met Vijay Prashad and invited him to Aotearoa, and that put me in contact with a lot of Indian communists living in Aotearoa, and the revolutionary potential amongst that group was incredibly inspiring to me. And you talked about like there being a disconnect with Indigenous people and unions. Imagine if we were able to connect. Imagine the revolutionary potential of migrant workers, unions, Māori communities. We've just had our biggest protest action ever in the history of this country, where our hikoi to Parliament. And so Māori are incredibly, we talk about communicative strategies. I think in the Māori community we call it the kumara vine, or the sweet potato vine, as being our way of communicating. So when an important event's happening, often you won't find any mention of it anywhere online, but everybody knows, everybody's connected in the way that they need to find that out. And when there's a disaster, COVID, when the government comes for our treaty rights, we see mobilisation happen in such an incredible way through those powerful, like non-state funded ways of communicating. And we see, I think, am I going too long? Okay. We see our one example I think is quite interesting to look at is Te Pāti Māori, our Māori Parliament, our Māori party that holds 6 seats within our Parliament. Unfortunately, we don't have a strong collective outside of Parliament, and so the danger of having a Māori party is that sometimes the solution that's offered to you is electoral politics, which is not going to give us the type of transformation that we need. But they are also incredibly strategic in the way that they communicate. So they realized mainstream media was never going to give them a fair shake, and so developed their own ways of communicating with their people. They don't really care about being in Parliament, they care about being in our Māori meeting houses, talking to the people. They use social media to communicate their messages, and they've been incredibly effective. We saw recently Hana do a haka in Parliament where she ripped up the Treaty Principles Bill, which was a really powerful way of communicating that reverberated around the world. And now we've just seen that Te Pāti Māori MPs have received a suspension that is the longest suspension that MPs have ever had in the history of our Parliament for that action. And so there have been big protests around, allowing people to do a haka in Parliament. But what has been fantastic about this really disproportionate and racist response to the haka is that it has made Māori realise that we are not fighting to be able to do a haka in Parliament, we are fighting for our own Parliament. But what we need, I think, is to learn from our revolutionary movements elsewhere around creating that pressure outside of Parliament also. You know, I think Te Pāti Māori are they sit somewhere between being in Parliament and outside of it, like currently suspended from Parliament. So it will be really interesting to see where they go with that. But I just, I strongly believe in the revolutionary potential of our solidarities. Kia ora.
Kia ora, ngā mihi. Thank you. There is so much to reflect on there in terms of social change and what does transformation look like when we talk about the revolutionary openings of social change. Over to you, Professor Sanjay.
Now I request my colleague, Professor Kulwin, to offer your views and perspective on the theme. Over to you, Professor Kulwin.
At the outset, my compliments to Professor Shubha and Professor Sanjay for curating this session. Indeed, a very important conversation. And it's a pleasure, always a pleasure to listen to Professor Datta. His culture-centric approach has been a way to evaluate, to approach community communications for advocacy, for various other purposes for all of us here in India. I have used it for one of my projects, which I'll share. So today I'm going to share a couple of experiences, but of course with a disclaimer that I started my career as a campaign planner, designer for corporate organizations and non-profit organizations as an advertising professional. So this journey from advertising campaigns to advocacy and research has been extremely full of enriching learnings for me. I have been part of advocacy campaigns as a participant, as a researcher, and as a mentor in the last 10 to 12 years. One of my significant memories has been the 2020 September Farm Bill protests, when farmers from our region, that is north of India, Punjab and Haryana, they started the Dilli Chalo, that is Go to Delhi movement, and that in protest against the 3 farm bills institutionalized by the government. This was a movement wherein my premise of digitally led entertainment education, SPCC, that is social and behavioral change communication, can play a significant role in public advocacy, in social advocacy or communication campaigns per se, with significant results. I remember that as an amplifier, one particular couplet of a poem which I was doing to provide updates, everyday updates on what the farmers are up to and what are the results of the ongoing conversations between the government and the farmers. And that was and it was, मन बहुत विचलित है, मन बहुत विचलित है, स्याले दी रात, पानी दी डिगदी एक एक बूंद, वो बैठे ने मजबूत, सिरे नहीं चढ़ी आज भी कोई गल बात. So that was like, you know, providing information to the diaspora, to everyone associated with the communities in the region, that even today's meeting fell flat, that people are still resolute and the protest moments are on. And why did I say that it is digitally enabled, digitally integrated, or at times digitally led education entertainment model, which is working significantly at the moment in some communities, especially communities of young adults or adolescents. One such experiment which was done during this time of resistance movement led by the farmers was trolley times. They had started this campaign, Twitter to Tractor, and that started a publication, Trolley Times, which was distributed to the diaspora, to the South Asian diaspora across, which was able to mobilize not just the funds, but also a lot of sentiment, a lot of support from across the world. And we've seen a significant positive change which led to then the bills being taken back by the government. So this was my experience as a participant. Later on, as a gender advocate, we initiated a campaign in a small community in Rajasthan in order to sensitize, in order to make younger women have, adolescent women have, more open conversations on sexual and reproductive health. Now, it was very interesting early on when we started working with the local community with the help of local NGO. Early interactions were very dry, curt, they were difficult. But once we started taking help of an existing campaign, which was Chaja, Go Shine campaign by an NGO, when we started taking reference points, Bol Behen, a chatbot, a digital Didi, Tanu Didi, the stories which were already shared, they were already available, the visuals and comic strips which were already in place, we started building transmedia story narratives around them. Then they opened up. The spiral of silence, the cultural silences which were there, which were led by the community at that point, were also broken. From there onwards, our engagement with the community in the form of participatory workshops, which Kanchan has also talked about, the importance of a bottoms-up approach in community communications. So a lot of integrated mobile-led use of social media mediated and internet mediated initiatives and interventions at times make us significant contributions, and it worked with us. After a while, the young girls were very enthusiastic. They joined the Bak community, wherein they could talk about not just issues of teen pregnancy, not just issues of menstrual health or MINAC or the care or availability of sanitary napkins and so on and so forth, but also issues which were very intimate, which were psychosomatic in nature, which were not just limited to health, but aspirational, that I want to make a digital reel. Can you teach me, Didi, how to make a digital reel? And that is what led to the third phase of our intervention in that particular community, when we started training them. That was a mobile literacy intervention. It was 4-day workshops organized for the young girls, wherein they were taught how to make a digital reel, a small mobile film, and they felt extremely empowered. Now, there was an interesting case there. Initially, the fathers in the community were extremely reluctant. So much so that the girls said that we don't even have a Facebook account, we don't even have an email. They were not willing to share any of their digital identities or footprints. However, when we started interacting for a longer period of time with the community, understanding them, and told them about the promotional side of using a digital reel to promote their artifacts, their Meenakari works, their local craftsmanship, that is where the interest took off. And they said, all right, there is no harm in learning how to make a 2-minute reel or a 1-minute reel. So it's been quite a journey, and we are still in touch with about 17 of those girls who interact with us on the mobile phone in the Bak gang, and they keep on telling us, of course, it is quite it's quite an enduring effort to drive conversations on sexual and reproductive health. But since we could have other conversations along with that, the community building, their ideas have been an integral part of this social and behavioral change initiative. And my last interaction, which we are having, now we are trying to spread this initiative to other parts of India. And one such initiative or sub-initiative of this kind is Digital Se Dosti. So we're trying to help older adults now, especially in terms of financial literacy, how to consult doctors for their psychosomatic disorders. So this has been the journey. And as a researcher, evaluation, like Professor Datta pointed out, and Kiran's also mentioned, Kanchan's also mentioned, that evaluation has been an important aspect. While most of us coming from campaign planning and research have been part of theory of change, wherein we've been looking at not just the inputs, but we've been looking at the outputs and outcomes of various campaigns, be it Happy to Bleed, be it Lahu Ka Lagan, various advocacy initiatives over time. But the real significant outcomes, I won't say, but significant interest is amplified when you create a campaign, you develop a campaign with the community. That can be a game. Of late, games, digital games have been an idea where young adults are thriving on, whether it's for news literacy, digital media literacy, or sexual and reproductive health literacy. So these interventions, if work together in a bottoms-up approach with the community, but keeping the education entertainment through transmedia storytelling format in mind, will perhaps help a country of this diversity, of this demographic diversity more.
Thank you, Kulwin, for that both interventionist and practical approach to how we can carry forward the theme of advocacy and activism. Mohan, I know that you had made opening remarks, but I also thought that you had your own specific perspective. You're on if you would like to offer a few more comments, and then I can open it up for discussion and wrap it up. Thank you, Mohan. You're on.
Thank you, Prof. Sanjay. What a beautiful thing it is to listen to this Correro moving both ways. And so I just want to thank each one of the panelists for your graciousness and kindness and for this dialogic opening. I think, the thing is, when I think of learning my theories of social change, actually they were from accompanying my uncle to lockouts, to factory lockouts, where we would be performing as young people in street theater and protest performances. And so you talked both Kanchan and Kalvin about the power of social change, and Prof. Buroshiva also mentioned this in terms of communities driving this, and only if we learn to listen to what communities have been doing. I think India has a rich and strong history of the ways in which communities have organized and mobilized and built infrastructures for social change, all the way from our anti-colonial struggles to, I love how you bring up the contemporary context, in all your conversations in terms of the farmer protests, the anti-CA protests, where people have so much at stake, and yet you have there, people crafting songs, writing poetry, dancing. I think about the CA protests and the spaces that were created by Muslim women around singing and dancing and poetry. And, connecting that to the kinds of Maori-led indigenous transformations that we see in Aotearoa. I think what Arama was referring to in terms of the power of community networks and community storytelling and community communication and rapidly spreading the message. So you talked about the Hikoi, and that's a powerful example in terms of how it mobilizes the community together. But I think also one of the most beautiful things that we see here in Aotearoa, and there's a lot to learn from about that, is the kind of solidarity that the struggles of Tangata Whenua generate across registers, and we have heard this narrative throughout this conference in terms of, Hikoi being one of the strongest protest marches, actually seeing Maori alongside Tangata Tiriti in terms of Pakeha, ethnic migrant communities coming together to stand in protest. I also wanted to touch a little bit upon what both Arama and Leon highlighted within this context, is that any movement in this sense and social change process is not monolithic. There are so many dimensions, like Leon talked about the union movement, largely in a broad sense, being largely white in Aotearoa. And of course, that is changing gradually. Those registers are changing, but there are also long ways to go. And within that context, when Arama, you referred to the work of Anu Kaloti and Migrant Workers Association, it does incredibly amazing work with hyper-precarious migrant workers, including hyper-precarious Indian workers who are exploited. And I just wanted to then come back to, something that both Kanchan and Calvin touched upon, this notion of transmedia storytelling being anchored in community. And what I found really interesting is when these stories get picked up by community. So what you're saying is that social change becomes meaningful when the stories are meaningful to communities and they drive that change. And then, I love the comment made by Dr. Buroshiva in terms of the reference to the GATT protests of the late 1980s. In fact, I came to my social awareness about movements and change and left politics through participating in many of those protests around Dunkel draft is what it was called in those days, and learning what that awareness is. So there is so much in terms of offering in the movement of ideas across these spaces. I see the synergies, but also see a lot of dialogic potential. Arama, I loved how you framed this in terms of looking at the global south and looking at the third world and the social change work of the third world and the theoretical work of the third world that is often ignored or erased by the whiteness of the left or the social change sector. And yet, the third world has so much rich history that it offers, including a very strong intellectual history. So I tautoku you for acknowledging that and for making that visible. Thank you, Prof. Sanjay.
Thank you, Mohan. Before I open the floor for discussion and queries, my opening question to any one of you is, we're also actively engaged in graduate studies programs in our respective universities. What I would like to ask is, how do you probably develop a research methodology pedagogy which moves away from the absolute notions of scientism, scientific method, etc., to the conception of the debates that we had in journalism? It is not necessarily always to be objective, but also try and articulate on whose side you are on. So this is a challenge for absolutely neutral, technique-oriented research methodology courses in many of our universities. And I'm sure that all of you, by way of your work, have developed modules or units, but they are specific to your classes. Is there a framework like, for example, either New Zealand and India could develop for a comprehensive graduate studies research methodology approach, which positions advocacy activism not necessarily always in political binaries, but in terms of policies and for people who matter? I would request any one of you, either from India or New Zealand, to take up this. I don't have any particular preference, but this is a larger question. I thought I could open up the discussion before specific comments come in. Mohan, Kulvin, Kanchan, Leon, or Arma, anybody can take this question. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, great question. Well, obviously, your culture-centered framework, I think, is hugely impactful and able to be applied to lots of different contexts. For ourselves, myself and some of my colleagues in the room here and Ara online as well, are part of a program of research called Wero, Working to End Racial Oppression. Wero also means challenge in our native language here. And for that work, we were working with researchers across multiple disciplines and different backgrounds, and maybe even different working definitions of what racism was when we first came together. And so we very quickly needed to develop some kind of framework that we could use together so that there was some kind of coherence across our research. And so we were very much inspired by the work of Bagel Chalisa, who has a textbook on Indigenous methodologies that's very, very accessible. And so we used her work to develop a framework that we call takarangi, which is a double spiral pattern. So it spirals inwards and it spirals outwards as well, and it's prominently featured in our carvings here. But really the components of the framework could be applied to any kind of visual representation that would be suitable for the context that it was used within. But what our framework contains is positioning. So how are you positioned in your research? Who are you doing research with? What is the power relationship between you and the people that are involved in your research? Who's not involved with your research? So just thinking through those types of positioning questions. Then we have our researchers think about their ontology. So how is it that they view who they are and the nature of reality and these types of things. So we ask them really fundamental questions that a lot of scientists never actually stop to consider. Things like, do you believe you have a soul that is separate from your body? And so having people actually, because many people who are not part of the mainstream society think about these things all the time because we're always othered, and so we're always having to come up against something that's different to ourselves. So by having all of our researchers ask these types of questions of themselves, they realize that when they go into an interaction, we hope through this, that when they go into an interaction, they're bringing beliefs and they're bringing values and they're bringing ideas about the world into that exchange. It's not just that they have a universal perspective and an objective perspective and somebody else is bringing all of these subjectivities into the equation. And so we also ask about their values, and then together as and then we consider the values of the communities that we're working with as well. So we're always thinking about ourselves and those involved in our research. And together as a team, we come up with our ethics and our ways of grounding our research in different epistemologies. So what are the kind of crucial anchor points in our research? What are the foundational texts and charter documents that we will draw on in our research? What are our shared definitions that we'll come up with together? And so our research becomes legible to one another. And then the final level of the framework is our research goals, which usually is something that you all define at the very beginning. So that is also like your political project. And those different layers also connects to every stage of the research. So engaging with communities that you'll be working with, designing the research, collecting data, interpreting it, disseminating it, and transformative action. So beyond just academic journals or conference presentations, how is it that you're using your research to come to create some kind of transformative change? So that was the model that we used. Would anyone else like to add anything?
I would love to, and that's really interesting, Araman. I think there are real convergences with what colleagues in India on this panel were suggesting. So I would love to hear your perspectives, in terms of what you're seeing in India in the context of research design and method.
Kulveem, do you want me to go first, or you're going? You talk. Go ahead, Kulveem.
Okay.
I'll
So
come after you.
to answer your question, Professor Sanjay, I have not come across a standardized or a uniform advocacy framework wherein we are able to place the actor, the subject, and the subjectivity of our research per se. But yes, there have been very interesting adaptations of inquiry. Like for instance, when we are working with, in the area of hashtag activism, with online advocates, with issue specialists, or in the case of student-led advocacy campaigns, at that point, Indian adaptations of participatory culture have been extremely supportive, wherein we've been able to create a template wherein the researcher or the principal researcher or a team of researchers, they identify almost on the same lines in terms of their involvement. Let's say if you're working in the area of online trolling, or if you've been, or digital sexual abuse, or domestic violence threats online, online hate, any such conversations. So initially, their identification to themselves, their understanding of where they're coming from, is something we encourage them to, through pen and paper, to identify themselves in that particular place. So that journey is undertaken. However, I have not seen a very structured way in terms of pointed references. Designs are, much more carved out in the mixed methods approaches we have, or even for that matter, multi-method approaches. We have qualitative designs, ways of qualitative inquiry which are completely indigenous. Like for instance, I was talking about games for change. So a lot of games like Stapu, like local games, have been adapted as research designs, as systematic research approaches, from the way the goals were defined, to the objectives being identified, to enrollment of participants in that particular game, how the game would be structured, layered and tested, to the final conduct of the experiment or on-ground activity, to final evaluation frameworks. Those are much more designed and have been Indianized according to the hyper-local context. And also the issue-based context. That's very important in our country. If we're dealing with menstruation, like for instance, I've been dealing with menstruation-based games, so those contexts, or sexual and reproductive health, so those contexts have to be appropriated in that game or the intervention that we've created as part of design. Action research, participatory action research has been adapted in various ways. But if you're looking at a step A to step C kind of a template in advocacy, there have been various adaptations of theory of change in public advocacy. Initially, interrogating theory of change was through non-governmental organizations, but social media advocacy, corporate social advocacy and public advocacy have created their variants in India, which have been working fairly well.
I'll just add to what Kulbeen has said. Professor Datta is very well aware of the work that we do at the UNESCO chair on community media. Kulbeen knows about it also. And at UNESCO chair on community media, the approach right from the beginning has been very participatory, that Kulbeen was referring to also. It's always about stakeholder engagement. And our approach is also, guided by feminist methodologies, so that adds value to our participatory approach. It's always about talking to the stakeholders. It's always about interacting with them, learning from them, and bringing in their perspectives into the research work that we do. Whatever work that we have done so far, whether we worked on a toolkit or a manual, it is always incorporating ideas that have come from the people. And we try to acknowledge and give them credit for, all the inputs that they have given. So, any work that we are doing would be meaningful only when, the people who are involved in the community media, in the community radio, they come on board. Whenever we've had, interactions with them, it kind of reinforces our faith in the power of community media. There is so much of diversity and in the ways the responses come from the field. They are very different, they are very contextual, but they are so enriching. There are things we would never think of in a particular way, and they are able to tell us, this is how you should be framing your question, or this is how you can look at this phenomenon. They give us reasons why a particular thing is happening, why a change is possible, why a change is not possible. So there's a lot of learning that comes from the ground, and any research that is being done, there's a lot of reflection, self-reflection that happens during the process. So you go to the field, you learn some things, you come back and you relook at the table and see, okay, are we asking the right questions? You know, and this whole very stakeholder based, very community based kind of approach that we follow in here in any research that we've been doing for the last 20 years. I think we have a lot to thank the communities for all the work that and learning that we've had so far.
Yeah, just a few.
Can I just add two short sentences? I think there is so much synergy between what Arama was articulating and what you both are articulating. And I think, with a lot of the work that we do with the culture-centered approach, and I think about, the concepts I was outlining in that Communicating Social Change book in 2011 was really dealing with 5 important questions. One is, how do academics negotiate the power that we bring with into spaces, working with communities? How do we reflect upon this power and turn this power into a positive resource in the process of co-creation, which then gets to the second question, which is, what does the power inequality look like in the co and create? That hyphen holds the power. So what does it mean to co-create voice infrastructures in communities, in processes of organizing for social change? So in that sense, when I compare, for instance, our work with Adivasis, like with Santali spaces, and here in the context of our work with Tangata Whenua, I think one of the synergies that appears there is the notion of land being at the heart of, and the relationship with forests and ecosystems being at the heart of how you design research methods. So that's one example of what it means then, which is my third point, to listen to community voices with an ethic of humility to design the research process, so that the research design doesn't come as an ad hoc or post hoc, but it starts from the very beginning of the process. The fourth point I wanted to bring is the notion of accountability. So what does it mean to be accountable to communities and to be accountable to spaces, as opposed to be accountable to the funder, or to be accountable to the journal articles, or to be accountable to the institutional structure of the university? And that calls for a fundamental kind of rewiring. And I will give you an example from our work with Singapore. When we were doing the work with migrant workers in Singapore, our accountability meant that they called upon, the work of the research team to publish white papers, develop advocacy campaigns that would place us under risk, yeah? But we had to sort of think through that and go ahead with it, because that is what accountability meant, which is my fifth point, which is, the point about body on the line that Arama was also talking about earlier. I don't think social change communication can happen without placing one's body on the line. The rest of it is performative, whether we talk about class, ethnicity, gender, gathering data to publish in journal articles, a lot of it can be performative unless it is committed to a politics that places the body on the line, particularly when the structure pushes back. And this is the thing I want to say, voice infrastructures is not just feel-good term that we have Adivasi people dancing and singing, and that's a voice infrastructure. A voice infrastructure is when communities speak, the forces of the structure will push back and seek to repress and use all kinds of repressive strategies. The question is, what are we going to do to sustain ourselves then? Are we going to vanish? Are we going to give in and cower down? Or if we are going to sustain, what are the kinds of relationships we are going to need? What are the kinds of connections we are going to need to sustain ourselves? So I think, Prof. Sanjay, it's a great question about method and design and how we are educating the next generation of graduate students and students around social change. I also think that a big part of that is the recognition that that change work has to dismantle the institutional structures of universities within which we are situated, and that often constrains the kind of change work we can do to actually become aware that the change work has to be in partnership with communities. I'm really skeptical of your Yale-educated MBA who has returned with a degree on communication for social change and is going to Bangladesh and teach young people in Bangladesh how to eat healthy food. There is a lot of that kind of social change that is fashionable and seductive. And I think we have to really think about an alternative way of doing education that is grounded and anchored. Thank you.
I'll just take 1 minute. The thing is, just to follow up what Professor Datta said, the thing is, we need to listen more than we teachers seem to talk too much. Maybe we can change our method and start listening. You know, the voices which are lower down. That is one major change that has to happen if we have to build a restructuring of the research methodology which we are talking about. Because, I mean, the examples that just comes to my mind, one of my, research scholars is doing, a research. We were talking so much of, say, physical health. We have never talked about the mental health. There are, and we need to make use of, the new kinds of equipment or the technology that is coming. Kulvin talked about the games. I would like to add on to which this a scholar of mine is doing. She is using apps. We need to look into many of these apps. Now we have the artificial intelligence, AI apps, which is trying to test the mental health of the youngsters today. They suffer from so much of depression. And these apps, there are a lot of apps which have come up which helps people to overcome their depression. So why not? We need to listen. If we are willing to listen, we can find out solutions for mental health. And these are greater problems, future problems that we have to face. So we will have to accommodate these kinds of element which comes from below. My people, we will have to listen to them and find out the reasons why what are the causes of their depression or what is going wrong. So unless we open up, there will be initial resistances, but it's not very difficult. As Kulvin's experiment shows, they can break these initial hesitancy and then enter into the real lives of these, or the real voices of these downtrodden. Thank you.
Thank you. I think both the panels are kind of running out of their time, both in terms of technical and other variables. What I would like to do is ask my colleagues here and also the participants there in New Zealand to pose their questions to me and to Professor Mohan. We will take it back to the panelists as well as the network of scholars we have, and we'll definitely be responsive to both the scholars and other intellectuals who are here. And on that note, I particularly thank the New Zealand Hub and my colleagues over there. And we are very happy to have collaborated on this first ever hub-to-hub collaboration. And this is not the end, but it is just a beginning of a dialogue where both New Zealand and India can address its respective issues of inequity and social change in a much more significant manner in the days to come. Thank you very much for my colleagues from India. Thanks again to New Zealand, and thanks to the participants here, online and offline. We have had a great start off, and Mohan, you will be on in a few minutes from now. Thank you very much. It's been a great morning. Give us a good clap. Thank you.
Migrant worker research you mentioned? I'm interested, I'm doing research now with migrant workers. Is it the idea
Chi.
Yeah, yeah.
Chi.
Che, 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 hello, che. ಒಂದೊಂಚೂರು ಕೊರ್ಲೆ ಒಂದು ಓದಲೆ ಮುಂಜೆ ನವಬಾರ್ದು ಮುಂಜೆ ಅದಾವ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಹಲೋ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಹಲೋ
forgive me if you give me 1 more minute. No problem. And when we finish the presentations, I mean, I have slides and she has slides, and after that you can go back to this one. The one from New Zealand, but keep him. I mean, is it possible to go back to this? Is it possible? Is it possible to go back to this one and have like a small sound so that it's not hovering about? Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the plenary session about digital inequalities. My name is Azi Levon. I'm a visiting professor here at MIC, originally from Israel. I'm doing studies about social media and about digital inclusion. I will be the moderator for this session, and we have a bunch of very skilled experts, professionals, academics who do research about both digital inequalities as well as programs to bridge digital inequalities. And we have another participant from New Zealand who's with us online. Before starting, I will make a short presentation of my own. Demonstrating a study that I did with colleagues, Dr. Hama Abul-Kishek and Dr. Nili Steinfeld, both of them also from Israel. So first of all, this issue of digital inequalities, why is it important? You know, I guess that for each and every one of us, if we think of our daily routine, what we do, we look for information. Look for news, look for medical information. We want to connect with our friends and family, especially if you are far away from them, like myself. And many small daily activities, all of them, sometimes even without our knowledge, take place online. For example, think about auto rickshaws, right? As you know, India is probably the world leader in peer-to-peer financial exchanges. Like 70%, from what I read, of daily exchanges, daily financial exchanges through tools like UPI and certain applications like these take place in India. So in these and other aspects, India is definitely highly sophisticated in terms of access to digital financial tools. On the other hand, we do know that there's still some people who do not know how to read and write, definitely people who are less literate in using the internet, in using social media. So especially here in India, it's very interesting to learn about these dialectics between people who are still not very well equipped and skilled and so on in using digital tools in a country that becomes more and more connected. And for this reason, governments across the world, and in my country, in India, of course, start programs in order to make people more literate, to know how to use at least basic tools that have to do with internet and social media skills. I want to introduce very briefly a study that I did with my colleagues in Israel about such a program. It is the leading program in Israel. It was operated by the Israeli Science and Technology Ministry, and actually we did a study for them. The program is called Lehava. The program is based on classes. Is it okay? I think there's some echo. The program is based on classes that are delivered in different parts of the country, especially peripheral regions, in which people can go and take introductory classes, as well as classes about social media and smartphones. And the government, the ministry, was interested to know about the efficiency of such programs. What do people learn from them? Do they think they know more when they leave the class than when they joined it? So they took me and my colleagues, and we evaluated the short-term as well as the long-term impact in another study of participating in the program. What we found, which is especially interesting in this session, and for this reason I also wanted to talk about this a little bit, is that what predicted both motivations to join the classes as well as perceived knowledge gained from the classes is not what we usually look at. We usually look at social demographic factors, right, like age and gender and education and other variables that typically predict digital inequalities, but it was the perceptions of technologies and the internet rather than the factors that predicted both motivations to join as well as knowledge gains. I think this is very important because it is true that, for example, men tend to be more literate in many places than women. More educated people tend to be more literate in terms of computers and the internet than people who are less educated and so on, but there are reasons behind it. These can be cultural reasons, these can be reasons associated with gender norms and so on. It's not the fact that we're talking about men and women, these are norms behind it that lead to that people use the internet more or less. So a few words about the study. So like I said, we do know digital inequalities include disparities in access as well as in attitude and skills and usage. And we do know that governments around the world implement different programs to reduce these inequalities. But surprisingly, very little research looked at these programs. Studies of these programs are in the intersection between education and media. And if you don't believe me, try and just Google studies about programs to reduce digital inequalities. Quite likely you'll reach this study. Where is that? If you scan the QR code, it's quite likely that you will reach our study and a small number of other studies as well. But that's it. This is a shame because this is an important topic that deserves more study. We did a study among two marginalized groups in Israel. One is Arab citizens. Some 15%, 15% of the Israeli population is composed of Arab Muslim population, and ultra-Orthodox Jewish, very religious communities, some 5 to 6% of the population. Typically, for religious reasons, for cultural reasons, for other reasons, there's less access, different usage patterns, different attitudes among these communities, and so we focused on them. The studies that we did, we went to 12 centers across Israel, specifically in peripheral areas, and we focused on introductory classes. That is, we went to the people who know very little. There are some classes about social media, about smartphone introduction, but the people who go to these classes already took the introductory classes. We are interested to go and talk to the people who know very little. Actually, I've been to some of these centers. It's amazing. You see people who hardly know, for example, how to use a computer mouse or how to touch a screen. People are afraid, you know, what happens if they touch a screen? Maybe the screen explodes on them. I actually saw it with my own eyes. And so we distributed questionnaires, like paper questionnaires. We got to almost 180 people before the classes started, and we got to 70 of these same people when the classes end, so we were able to see if there were differences in their knowledge before and after the classes, knowledge of these same people. And the tools that, or the measures that we used are motivation scale, what made you go to this class, perceptions of the internet and technology. That is, on the one hand, people who see the internet as a good place, a place with promises, a place that has a lot of benefits, potential benefits, and on the other hand, people that can see it as a destructive place, a place with many disadvantages. We also looked for digital self-efficacy, for locus of control scale, meaning locus of control, meaning people who think that they have control over their fate. And on the other hand, people who think that you know, everything is decided from outside and they have very little control. And we also looked at the social demographic factors. The bottom lines is that we found that perceptions of the internet and technology were the strongest predictors of motivations to join the classes, as well as knowledge gains. On the other hand, social demographic factors like gender, like education, like income, had no significant effect. This does not mean that men and women are similarly motivated or have similar you know, internet capabilities. It does mean that there are cultural and other gendered norms behind these facts. So, for example, when we look at the motivations to join these classes in order to become familiar with new technologies, the only variable, and we tested a few, quite a few, predicting that is perceptions of the internet. The people who thought that the internet can bring about many benefits and is generally a place with many promises are the people who joined the classes in order to become familiar with new technologies. The people who wanted to join these classes in order to improve their literacy also were these people who had good views about technology and the internet. The people who joined the classes in order to improve their ability to use the internet are people who already, before they joined, have good perceptions of the potentials of the internet for themselves, as well as some familiarity with activities on the internet. And lastly, when we checked the difference between people's reported familiarity with concepts about the internet before and after the classes, so the people who gained the most were the people whose perception of technology were good, and the people also who thought that they have control over the course of their life events. So, to conclude, a number of implications from this. We see that positive perceptions of the internet and technology are essential prerequisites for digital learning. If we want people to come and learn more about the digital world, we already want them to come with open-minded and with good views about what the internet can bring about. The programs themselves should focus not only on access but also on shaping positive attitudes, because we want people to continue with their learning after the classes end. This is actually a drawback of these classes. Typically when classes end, that's it. There's no follow-up and no one is watching over the participants when the classes are done. And so at least we want to instill in them, you know, some good feelings about what the internet can bring about now and in the future. And in terms of recruiting people for these classes, we want to make a targeted outreach and reach these people who already have positive views about the internet in order to recruit them for such classes. So perceptions predict participation in these classes, and attitudes predict achievement. And cultural readiness, we see, is decisive, more decisive than economic and other backgrounds in terms of bridging digital inequalities in these classes. So this was by way of a long introduction. And we have 5 presentations, 5 very interesting presentations. And first, I want to start with Dr. Mausumi Bhattacharya, right? Pronounce it right. Dr. Mausumi is an associate professor and head of Center for Journalism and Mass Communication in Vista Bharati, a center university of national importance in India. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm feeling extremely honored to be here today, and thanks to Professor B.P. Sanjay. Thank you. And Dr. Subha and other colleagues here in Manipal for organizing such important conference here. This is a very good gathering, and since morning I have been listening to many of the stalwarts in this field, and I'm particularly honored to share this panel with Professor Vinod Pavrala, Dr. Purashiv Dashgupta, who has been my teacher during my post-graduation in Calcutta University, and Azure Levan, and of course my dear friend Kulvin. So, taking cue from the one line from my previous presenter, that creating positive digital attitude, which is very important, but what the key findings of my previous speaker, that gender and other cultural norms that had actually no effect, that is absolutely against what I will be sharing today. And maybe in the morning, we listened to many presentations, a lot of good initiatives and all. So I will like to share a few data. It will be totally a data-driven secondary research. I'll share with you. After that, I will talk about like one initiative which we have taken up in our university, in our department. And my intervention actually focuses on how gender, caste, and region, as deeply embedded in social hierarchies, intersect to shape digital marginalization. Not as an accident, by the way, but as a reproduction of historical and social inequalities, but yes, in a new medium. So if we talk about the South Asian crossroads, like if we can see, let me begin with a wider lens. According to a very recent report by the World Economic Forum, South Asia is currently undergoing massive economic momentum, as we all know. But yes, this boom is not at all inclusive. Out of the 2.6 billion people in South Asia who are still offline, the majority are women and girls. And while internet access is growing, 31% of women are expected to remain digitally excluded in this year, that is 2025. This isn't just a gender issue, it's a developmental emergency. We need to understand that. We cannot just segregate it as a gender issue, where exclusion from digital access translates into exclusion from opportunity, exclusion from participation, and of course, autonomy. So now, how does such layers of exclusion actually take place? Through gender, religion, and caste. The India Inequality Report in 2022 provides a very grim snapshot. Indian women are 15% less likely to own a mobile phone I'll give you an example, primary evidence-based example later after this. 33% less likely to use mobile internet and make up just 1/3 of all internet users in India. Compare this to these other South Asian nations, India lags behind in digital gender equity. The report also tells us that urban internet access, you can see there, urban internet access is 67%, but rural access is only 31%. Despite a higher annual growth rate, gender, place, and economic standing coalesce into a pattern of exclusion. Now, what about the caste? When caste decides your digital fate, actually we have a stalwart here, Professor Vinod Pavrala, who will be talking on this. I'll just touch a little, just a study. That is a 2024 study by Professor Ramesh and his team, which says that only 6% SC/ST household owns a computer, just 14 to 15% have internet access, and digital literacy is as low as 12 to 13% among these communities. Now, why does this matter? Because this lack of digital access limits their ability to apply for any welfare scheme, apply for even education, enroll in online education, engaging with e-governance platforms. Nowadays, we all know how important in engaging with e-governance platforms. In other words, caste continues to mediate access to the state and economy, now in digital form. Now, to understand this digital marginalization, if we look into the TRI 2024 report, we will see that only 35% of rural Indians are connected compared to 70% in urban areas. States like Jharkhand, Bihar, and Chhattisgarh are consistently at the bottom of internet penetration ranking, in contrast to Maharashtra, Goa, and yes, Kerala, of course, which was obviously top the list. A 2022 study is showing on digital fluency in semi-rural area, even popular tourist towns, like I'm talking about a town in West Bengal, that is Itechun, it's a very famous tourist spot, Ghatshila in Bihar, showed low digital maturity, signaling untapped potential and underutilized connectivity, which actually affects the local economy. Now the core argument of intersectionality. So let's bring all these threads together. So what happens when a person is just a rural, or just Dalit, or just a woman, but if the person is all three, then what happens? Intersectionality, as theorized by Kimberly Crenshaw, which I have mentioned here, urges us to see how these identities interact, not stack. A Dalit woman in a village in Jharkhand doesn't just lack digital access, but she faces gendered social restrictions, caste-based stigma, and infrastructural neglect. The result is a compound exclusion from not only digital literacy, but from voice, raising voice, and from getting all the opportunities. Now, there are other scenarios also. I will talk about a study on the urban slums, a case from Margins. Interestingly, this study showed us that which has been done in 38 urban slums in Delhi, which reveals a different pattern. 60% of women had mobile phones compared to 39% of men. Among users, 57% of women had internet access against 42% of men. Women were more confident in learning digital skills than men. But this case study, where agency, economic participation, and access made, women actually defy all the odds. But these are outliers, not the exact scenario everywhere. By the way, they hint a possibility. We can take up measures from such studies. Now, if this is the scenario, now lot of researchers who have shared their authentic research with us in the domain. So what actually shows us that we must shift from techno-determinism to social acceptability. That is something which is becoming very relevant in all the studies. And the internet is always not the great leveler. That is very, very, very important to understand, that if we ignore who is already left behind, then it is very difficult for the internet to be a leveler. That one has to understand well. So here I have pointed out 4 metrics. One is functional inclusion. So we need actually affordability, skills, and culturally relevant tools beyond success. So there is a very little discussion about the tools, but yes, when Sanjay sir asked a very pertinent question about the design, research, design and all, maybe this can come up, which is very important because this is the way, and that question was very pertinent because we researchers also, we need to understand maybe we can actually show path from our research, through our research, this functional inclusion. We are discussing a lot, we are showing a lot of data and all, but what are the process to, how to functionally include this entire clan? Then caste and gender disaggregated data. We cannot fix what we do not measure correctly. This point actually depends on the first point. If we are not getting exact strategy, if we are not actually getting the exact data, so how could we actually fix what we do not know? This is something very important. Then the third is community-driven digital literacy. We have heard about this in the morning. Everybody, the speakers, they talked about it. We have heard about how actually in New Zealand the researchers are doing. In fact, Kulvin told us a lot about this. Kulvin, there is a film on this Farmers' Revolution by Nishtha Jain. What you just said, that it was actually depicted in that film. It's a very, very interesting film, which we experienced in that film. Training and empowering local change agents within SC, ST, OBC communities. I know how important this is because as I'm telling you that I will share primary data also with you regarding our departmental research. It is an outreach program taken up by our students, master's students, for their digital literacy. The name is Digital Disha, which we have coined. And we are going to different villages, a team of students, they are going there. And they are trying to understand, first thing, this community learning, community communication, how important it is. Learning from them, and the most important thing is that what do they want to learn? That is also very important. Whenever we are going to do some research, this discussion came up in the morning that they should be our co-researcher. We just cannot use them or consider them as sample. That is becoming very, very difficult actually. And the way Kulvin said about her own research, same experience goes with us. Like we initially thought that we will be going there, then we will be training, and we had our own module, set of module. Believe you in May, we had to change that entire module after talking to them. After interacting with them, then we found that basically it's not about the same module which is going to help all the villagers out there. We had to segregate it in 3 training modules because few of them, they know a little bit about internet or mobile. Few of them, they do not know, they did not touch any mobile device in their life. And few of them, yes, they do know, they use them, but they are not aware of the negative challenges of digital inclusion. That is also there. So we had to do that. So this is something very important. I could not share those slides because their results are not out. Maybe I can share this with Professor Sanjay after August. So because that can give us an idea also that how important it is not only community communication, before getting into any research or for such, especially for such digital inclusion or access, we need to understand a lot of issues, a lot of cultural norms. That is something which is very important. And of course, policy intervention. One size fits all does not work. We must tailor interventions for intersectional inclusion. This is, I think all of us, we are facing this whenever we are trying to incorporate NEP into our syllabus. So this is something, yes, if this structure of NEP in the syllabus, if it can go well with the metro cities, that is not going well with the semi-rural areas universities. Ours is a very, very, very old traditional university. In fact, we are also having a lot of problem in this. So this is something we need to understand. And one most important point, this whose version of India is actually truly online, that is also we need to learn. It's not about blaming anyone. If we are discussing something, if we are doing research on something, this reality has to be there. So, I mean, it has to come out. So until a urban woman in Chhattisgarh or a Dalit girl in rural Bengal or a Muslim homemaker in a semi-urban area of a small town of Uttar Pradesh, they can actually use the internet with confidence, safety and purpose. We have not achieved actually digital inclusion. This I think all of us will agree with this. And digital marginalization is not just an access problem. It's a justice problem. To me, it's a justice problem. We need not just more such devices. We actually need, with more dignity, more participation, and more power in hands of the mostly excluded. So that is what my point so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. We have 2 hours for the entire session, so we're doing 15-minute slots for each presenter, then we'll have half an hour at the end for questions and answers. So next, let me invite Dr. Vinod Pavarala, the chairholder of the UNESCO Chair on Community Media at the University of Hyderabad. Please.
Is it okay if I push this here?
You can also have the mic if you want.
Yeah.
If you want to go around.
No, it's okay. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. If you don't mind, before I start, I just want to take a minute to remember all the people caught up in all the violent conflicts and wars going around the world, not to speak of all the daily violence perpetrated on marginalized communities everywhere. Just to remember them for a minute. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I feel I'm a bit of an interloper on this panel. I don't really work on digital. People who know me more as a person who's been working on communication for social change and community media. I mean, there is Dr. Kulvein Trehan and Dr. Maushmi Bhattacharya, the chair of the panel, have all done a lot of work on digital. In fact, last year at some conference, I was introduced as the last of the analog messiahs, much to my amusement. So I do believe in the analog still quite a bit. Anyway, when Sanjay wrote to me asking if I'll participate in this, I was quite tempted by the write-up he shared with us. There were lots of provocative ideas and questions there. And it so happened that a PhD student and I have started some work about a year ago looking at what we are calling the digital turn in community media in South Asia. So we have undertaken a major work with AMARC, which is the World Association of Community Radios, looking at India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, and seeing the kind of digital choices being dangled before them, especially the community radios. There are something like 900 stations across these countries. As part of that, as we started researching, we of course stumble across grand state visions for digitalization. And so I spent some time looking at those. And what I'm sharing today is a bit of a critique of that. And Dr. Maushmi has already sort of flagged quite a few issues that I have in mind. So digital inclusion is a key policy aim in the global south, right? And South Asia is no exception. India's Digital India program launched in 2015, and Bangladesh's Vision 2021, which is a part of its Digital Bangladesh, Digital Bangladesh is a part of this larger Vision 2021, was launched in 2008. It was meant to coincide with Bangladesh's 50th anniversary of its birth. Both of these visions present very ambitious frameworks for extending digital infrastructure, literacy, and governance. Yet, if you read them from a critical point of view, these initiatives maintain what one can call a techno-solutionist posture. They tout digital transformation as a path to democracy, development, and equity. So what I'm going to share over the next 10-12 minutes tries to address whether such visions materialize in practice or reproduce long-standing inequalities, as we have already heard, rooted in caste, class, gender, and governance structures. So Digital India launched with three main pillars. One is digital infrastructure as a utility, looking at digital delivery of services and digital literacy. And there are a bunch of programs that are central to Digital India, all of them with grand titles and so on. There is something called PMG Disha, Pradhan Mantri Gramin Digital Saksharata Abhiyan, and you just have heard about the urban-rural divide in internet connectivity in India, so it's supposed to address that. The target was to reach 60 million rural households with internet. Things like common service centers and the Internet Sathi program to train rural women. All of these are programs as part of that Digital India thing. The vision places quite a strong emphasis on integrating various digital governance platforms such as Umang, which is a unified mobile application for what they call new age governance, mygov.in, Aadhaar linked services, e-healthcare, and so on. And all of these are presented as democratizing public service delivery system in the country. Digital Bangladesh, which is part of Vision 2021, like I said, apart from articulating certain broad political and economic aspirations for the country, aim to make the nation digital ready by its 50th anniversary. ICT policies sought improved governance, transparency, e-procurement, digitized land records, youth employment through technology. Now, people have talked a bit about, how this could spark off efficient e-procurement, land registry reform, suggesting digital investments will reduce corruption, streamline access, and so on. However, if you look at what's happening in Bangladesh just the last few years, the digital optimism coexists rather uneasily with political repression. Bangladesh's Digital Security Act of 2018 and the recurring internet shutdowns demonstrate the risks of state repression. Now, traditional definitions of digital inclusion, things like access, literacy, engagement, are being increasingly expanded by scholars who are working on digital issues. They have been expanded to include structural inequities and power relations. You have already heard Maushmi talk about those issues. The scholars are suggesting that mere access remains insufficient in bridging the digital divide unless intersected by literacy, affordability, agency, infrastructure that is context appropriate, that is appropriate to the particular context. There are now, there's quite a bit of new work emerging in the last 5-6 years, a lot post-COVID, that highlight a persisting caste-based digital gap, showing that SC/ST groups are disproportionately underconnected due to historical deprivation. So digital inclusion is increasingly shaped by gender, caste, class, geography, and language, and a lot of interesting numbers were presented to highlight this already. In Bangladesh, rural women often lack literacy and mobility to access community e-centers, reflecting complex societal constraints. And feminist critiques have been emphasizing how digital technologies can both empower and control, often reinforcing social norms, underscoring the failure of digital programs without adequate cultural sensitivity, right? So that's an important point. And if you look at work of scholars like Nick Cowdery, Cowdery warns that digital initiatives may actually extend data extractivism, right? Positioning citizens as data subjects rather than empowered participants, primarily driving neoliberal governance rather than inclusive development. And there is some recent work showing how biometric subsidy schemes meant for farmers, such as in my state, a program called Raitu Bharosa in India, actually ends up excluding marginal farmers due to data mismatches and ends up reproducing class and caste inequalities. There are scholars that advocate for data justice frameworks in social welfare, highlighting issues of transparency, accountability, structural equity. So it is quite evident that there are big gaps between these grandiose state visions and concrete empirical realities on the ground. You look at, for example, in India, the Aadhaar-linked welfare exclusion. The vision was that Aadhaar is designed to streamline welfare delivery via biometric authentication. And the reality is that there is exclusion due to authentication failures and data mismatches, right? In Jharkhand, at least 20 starvation deaths were reported in 3 years between 2017 and 2020 after ration cards were cancelled for not being linked to Aadhaar, right? Elderly and rural citizens face biometric mismatch problems due to worn out fingerprints or because of faulty internet connections. Ritika Khera, the economist who tracks digital welfare programs, once wrote, "Automation killed people instead of improving delivery." Yeah. Common service centers, again, another linchpin in the government program, often fails in remote areas. CSCs were set up as last mile digital service hubs for rural citizens. Many CSCs, if you have gone to places like Jharkhand or interiors of West Bengal, Bihar, and so on, you see that they lack connectivity, infrastructure, trained staff. A study in UP and Odisha found that these common service centers were often shut down, lacked internet, and only functioned for basic photocopying and not digital services. And women tended to avoid common service centers due to gender norms prevalent in the area, the absence of female operators, and the risks of harassment. So one needs to look at things from a grounded micro level to understand where these visions are going. We have already heard about mobile access, gendered access. I just want to spend maybe 2-3 minutes to talk about caste and digital exclusion, which is now being flagged quite a bit by some interesting scholars. For example, Dalit gig workers, delivery agents, ride-hailing drivers have reported facing platform surveillance, lack of bargaining power, algorithmic devaluation of what they do, and so on. So researchers are now arguing that platform work doesn't erase caste, but repackages it in new market language, often offering only precarious inclusion of a kind. So digital systems, it is said, are not neutral. They reflect and amplify the social order in which they are embedded. In fact, people like Suraj Yangde have now started talking about digital Brahmanism. So this is an interesting line of work that opened up in the last few years, and there's a lot of exciting empirical data that's coming out about how digital so-called inclusive policies are actually deepening the existing structural inequalities and hierarchies. And COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the caste digital divide, right? Dalit and Adivasi students lacked device access, digital literacy, quiet spaces to study, right? These were exacerbated during the COVID-19 period. Now, I just want to, before I leave, I don't want to leave without saying, so what's the way out? I think there are lots of policy implications of caste inequalities in digital inclusion and the broader issues of inclusivities that I talked about. So one of the things that I have been talking about is, can we think of hybrid models, where there are analog continuities even as we begin to digitize, right? So analog institutions that already exist, like community media, village councils, self-help groups, offer inclusivity, accountability, local knowledge systems. So hybrid models that integrate SMS-based systems with offline engagement, public interest data literacy can complement digital initiatives. A lot of the poor who access things like Aadhaar and a lot of app-based welfare delivery actually go to the offices because they want to see a human face that responds to them, not through an anonymous app, right? Because they don't trust. There are issues of trust with the bureaucracy. And so increasingly, to depend just on a digital app to deliver welfare is pretty much excluding large numbers of people from welfare programs. So the one policy recommendation, if there is time, I could share other things that I had in mind. But this hybrid sort of a path is probably what is more appropriate for India. Not being a Luddite and rejecting the digital entirely, of course, you can't these days. But can we think, especially if you are trying to be inclusive, whether we can move towards a more analog based hybrid systems where You can do digital for certain kind of data reporting, data collection, and so on, but retain the human interfaces for the poor and marginalized, so they have trust in the system. Yeah. So let me stop there. These are some thoughts that are coming out of this work we are doing. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pavarala, for this enlightening talk, and especially for focusing on the fact that when we transition to the digital, for example, transportation, education, medicine, those people who are less fluent in activating these digital devices and apps are sometimes left behind, especially when the services are becoming exclusively digital, which is a huge problem, of course, which only highlights the importance of making people more literate. Next, we're going to the Zoom. We're going online. Our next presenter, Dr. Mohan Dutta from New Zealand. Professor Dutta is the Dean's Chair Professor of Communication and Director of the Center of Culture Center Approach for Research and Evaluation at Massey University. He's the Chair of the Ethnicity and Race in Communication Division of the ICA.
Kia ora koutou katoa. I want to begin by just sharing that I'll have to leave after just sharing my thoughts, and I apologize for that. I woke up at 5 a.m. in the morning for our hub here, so I'm just wrapping up the day. But it's what a pleasure it is to be on this panel with colleagues whose work I deeply respect. So thank you, Professor Sanjay, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure. I want to begin by acknowledging the ancestors of Rangitane, whose ancestral land, knowledge, and struggles shape the basis for this conversation that I'm participating in. I also want to acknowledge, following up on Vinod, the struggles of the people of Palestine in the contemporary context, in the global landscape, and at the same time, the struggles of the people in India at the margins that are struggling against ongoing forms of repression. And that will actually shape this conversation in terms of the thoughts I offer within the context of the broader question of digital inclusion. I will offer you some of the key tenets from my ongoing work over the last 2 decades on the culture-centered approach, or the CCA, both as a decolonizing framework for thinking through the questions of voice, erasure, asking whose voice, what are the processes of erasure that are scripted into the ways in which we construct infrastructures of inclusion and technology, asking the questions who includes, following from the work of Ruha Benjamin, arguing that it is the hegemonic structures of whiteness, of white supremacy, neoliberal capitalism, and in the Indian context of caste that shape the architectures of the very conversation on inclusion, and then really build upon that to ask, and really following up on these excellent couple of presentations we have had in terms of how do these terms of inclusion then shape the ways in which we listen to particular voices and do not listen to particular voices. What are the kinds of erasures that are built into these structures? And then I will wrap up by asking questions around how do communities organize, what are the justice-based frameworks around technology and inclusion that we can think of, and I will particularly refer you to my work with my colleague and co-author, Professor Srividya Ramasubramaniam. We have been working on a culture-centered approach to data justice, drawing in the concept of voice that comes from the CCA to theorize what does justice look like when discussed in the context of data. So, to begin with, when thinking about the broader question of technologies and digital infrastructures, I want to make the argument that the overarching structures that shape these technologies are structures of racial capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, and again, in the Indian context, structures of caste. Now, I went to my undergraduate education, I got a BTech at IIT Kharagpur, and when I think about the networks of caste that move through, particularly in terms of constructions of merit, technology and development that form the sort of technology infrastructures of the Silicon Valley, it is very much the caste-based infrastructure. Vinod referred to the work of Suraj Yangre in terms of Brahminical technology. One can build on that further to argue that the very algorithms that shape the global infrastructures of tech are deeply embedded in casteist ideologies that work hand in hand with and alongside the overarching ideology of whiteness that takes for granted values of white culture as universal. So values that are rooted in reductionism, values that are rooted in cognitivism, values that are rooted in the ongoing erasure of the struggles from the margins. So inclusion in the sense into these platforms or the concept of inclusion in these platforms becomes a way for the platforms to further perpetuate. And again, Vinod referred to the work of Nick Couldry. I refer to the work of Maori scholars such as Tahu Kukutai, who argued that these become ways for platform capital to expand its extractive reach and continuing to perpetuate data colonialism, where people are turned into data. People's bodies, particularly the bodies of people at the margins, are turned into data as sources and sites of profiteering, while the same people are turned into sites of surveillance. So across the globe, in terms of indigenous struggles, global South struggles, we see the ways in which this notion of inclusion itself is turned on its head to surveil on communities, to surveil dissent, to surveil protest movements. So further inclusion is also the further expansion of the global digitally enabled military, police, industrial infrastructure. So if you think about the technologies that often emerge within this context, they come out of defense, police, military context. And this is something that Ruha Benjamin invites us to think about in terms of the implications of these technologies when these technologies have fundamentally been designed as technologies of surveillance, carrying out surveillance on communities at the margins. So think about the intersections of this with policing, with the development of newer and newer techniques of disciplining of people, of militarizing of communities, and of repression of dissent. So within that context then, when you think about the state structure and what is its role, it is worthwhile to consider the interpenetrations of techno-capitalism with the nature of repression carried out by authoritarian states, particularly within the context of the rise of authoritarian populism and the deployment of technologies. And here I appreciate Vinod pointing out the data on the shutdowns in Bangladesh. What is really critical to note when looking at the data is the largest number of shutdowns globally in terms of the period between 2020 and 2025 have happened in India. So what are the implications of that in terms of the ways in which shutdowns have been mobilized to suppress dissent and articulations of participation and spaces of participation? And particularly critical here is in terms of the reasons for carrying out these shutdowns or where these shutdowns have been carried out. So say for instance, if you look at, and I'm just pulling out the data, 2012 India had 3 shutdowns, 2013 5, 2014 6, went up to 14 in 2015, 31 in 2016, 79 in 2017, 134 in 2018, and then 2019 and 2020 saw 106 and 129 respectively. That then further went up to in 2021 over 500 shutdowns that collectively were accumulated between the 16 and 23 period. Again, 22, we did not have explicit data, but estimated around 100 plus based on trends. And then we do have the data for 2023 and 24. 23 had 116, and 24 had 84 shutdowns. Now, if you think about where these shutdowns have been carried out in spaces like, where we have seen protests, for instance, 41 of the 84 shutdowns in 2024 were linked with protests, 23 to communal violence, and 5 during government job examinations. And then if you look at the spaces where the shutdowns had been carried out, the state of Manipur had the most shutdowns within India in 2021, followed by Haryana and Jammu and Kashmir. So it's really important to note particularly the nature of shutdowns in Manipur and Jammu and Kashmir, two spaces where we also see extreme marginalization within the context of the repressive role of the state. Particularly in the context of Manipur, it is worthwhile to consider these shutdowns within the context of the absence of fundamental reporting of the violence that has been carried out or that was occurring in Manipur, and there was a blackout around the violence. So the question in terms of digital inclusion ought to also ask, what is the role of the state, and how does the state collaborate with global techno-capital in terms of determining the nature of access to technology? It seems like at its whim, the state can control who does and who does not have access to the technology at a structural level, but also that the state can manipulate the technology on one hand to deploy it for purposes of surveillance, and on the other hand to minimize or to erase discursive architectures for protest and dissent. So I invite you, when thinking about the broader question of digital inclusion, to consider the role of structures, and particularly in terms of the interpenetrations of the state structure, the neoliberal capitalist structure, and their interplays in terms of the ways in which participation in technologies are shaped. The second point I want to get into is the role of particularly specific forms of platforms as sources of disinformation and dissemination of hate. And again, I will draw here from an ongoing piece of work that CARE has been doing. This is our work in India based upon a national level survey with Muslims. This has been ongoing for the past 3 years. And I will share with you some of the findings from our data in 2021, collected between November and December, where we find that of the sample of 1,000 Muslims that were surveyed, 60% said that they were exposed to violence that targeted Muslims in terms of social media content.
I'm sorry, just a short interruption. We have 2 more minutes. If you can try to conclude by then. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Over 70% said that they were exposed to content calling for conflict, hatred, and violence. And then 63% of the sample said that they stopped participating on social media because of their exposure to violence. So these findings for me raise critical questions in terms of the nature of technological platforms and their relationship to democracy, particularly within the context of the proliferation of hate. So when you have a broader overarching infrastructure that is invested in profiting from the dissemination of hate, and when that essentially translates into the erasure of a significant part of the communities at margins from those discursive spaces, what are the implications for inclusion? So I'll take a minute to wrap up. When we think about an analysis of this question of digital inclusion from critical interrogation of the nature of structure, it is worthwhile to consider what does a framework of data justice look like. And I will here offer 3 critical points. Culturally centering questions of data justice turns to the question of who owns the data, how do we work alongside communities to actually build movements, to actually build processes of transformation where communities own the data. In New Zealand, for instance, we see ongoing work on data sovereignty. New Zealand has offered a framework for data sovereignty that is now being accepted globally in different contexts. The second question is, how do we mobilize communities toward addressing the kinds of platforms that disseminate hate and disinformation, particularly in terms of developing policy infrastructures that are able to deal with the work of technologies in disseminating hate. And finally, how do we place a conversation on digital literacy within a broader context of access to education in a country where the fundamental access to quality education is highly unequal, shaped by the rural-urban, the class divide, the caste divide, the religious divide, and so on. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate this conversation.
Okay, next we move to Dr. Buroshiva Dasgupta, Professor and Director from Sister Nivedita University from West Bengal. The floor is yours.
Well, we are still in good morning, and I thank Professor Sanjay to sort of invite me to this ICA conference, and of course to Padmarani and Shubha also to inviting me to MIC, which, I mean, Manipal is, to me, is like a second home, so I always enjoy coming and interacting with them. So I've been closely following what my predecessors have been talking about digital inclusion, and I was intrigued by Professor Vinod's statement that he was once considered as the last of the analogs. So I think that's the, the future of as we grow senior, that's the kind of, exclusion which we will face in our, society. And I mean, we welcome the youngsters, but then we need to not ignore the experience which the analog technology will be kind of evolving from one to the other. We have seen it so much in media itself, but it's not that we have seen in the history of media evolution, technological evolution, that one hasn't replaced the other. So his suggestion of trying to make a hybrid of the analog and the digital is highly recommended. So I also follow that scheme. But coming back to the present digital, if we can say overreaction or a kind of obsession, and it's definitely, it has done good for the society. And I started talking about the positive points of digital when people were not talking about it at all. But now I am into the more into the analog school, trying to find out, or being being fearing the excesses of the digital digital world. So definitely, if we go by statistics, we had a lot of statistics from Moushumi. I'll just give a few and go on to the other implications of the statistics. I mean, there has been the government scheme, as we know, the Digital India, and then the other Disha, which Professor Binod also talked about, then the Aadhaar, the e-governance things, and then they have, to a large extent, done a good to, good to India by digitizing the people. We know by figures as well that in 2016, the internet access was 26%, whereas in 2025, it is crossing 70%. So these schemes definitely has helped. But, what you need to understand, we had Dr. Mohan also talked about, we have to kind of do a critical, take a critical view of all the data that is given to us. I mean, who owns the data? That's also a question we need to ask. And also distinguish between the data, which is government propaganda, and the reality. And the what is the reality at the ground level. So I'll give you one, I'll sort of read out, or one of the, you could say, case study, which some of my researchers in the university has been doing about how the schemes on education, digitization of the education has affected. I mean, the applicability, there is a lot of fanfare talking about that so many people have been, brought under the digital inclusion and everything. But in reality, we need to look into, and one example will show how there is a large gap between, the statement that we get it from, or the data that we get it from government, and the reality at the ground level. So the thing is, there is one scheme, I'll talk about this, this is in West Bengal. There is a scheme called Torune Shopno. That's the dream of the young. And this is basically a scheme by the government to digitize the students in the state. I mean, at the, in 2021, they introduced it to integrate, say, technology with education. But basically, it basically gave, say, 10,000 rupees or buying a tablet for the students +2, or, that's the way it was being distributed. So that is one area, which is definitely, it's a very praiseworthy kind of, move to get the people included into the, rather the students included into the digital sphere. But what is the impact? If we go down, because we had our students, also one of my, researchers, research scholars who supervised it, and they were working in several schools in one of the, say, the remotest areas of West Bengal, that is the Sundarbans. If you look into the map, it comes on almost on the sea coast, on the seaside. And there, the scene is quite, I would say, quite unhappy. The government has said that we have distributed, say, the last year, in 1 year, they have distributed 5.5, tabs to 5.5 lakhs of people, students from classes 11 and 12. And then if you go to this, to the schools actually and speak to the students and to the teachers, you have a different picture altogether. First of all, we have given them the money, but have not found out actually how it is working. The students have not been able to, they have collected the bias from their, both from their parents as well as teachers, who have made them feel that the use of these tabs can affect their health. We have never been able to make them aware otherwise. So there is a health problem which makes them hesitant in making use of it. Secondly, the teachers. We have a very low ratio between teacher and the students, and there itself, the teachers, once they find that the tabs are there and there is a scheme, the content is created in Bangla Shikha. That's they are content in YouTube. There is a channel which is good. Comparatively good. The quality of the material that's given to them, which they can see through their tabs, they are afraid, the school teachers. If there is 1 to, say, 100 students, even that teacher is scared that he or she will lose her job while promoting this particular scheme, the Bangla Shikha through the YouTube. So you can see that there is no monitoring how it is being implemented. You give the money and think that is done, but there is no way to find out how it is being implemented. So it is important that we have a monitoring system of how this digitization happening. Just by floating data, saying that 70% have internet today, tomorrow it is going to 90%, and then distributing data. I just talked about West Bengal. Such schemes are there in other states as well, giving them, tablets, or giving them ways to have internet access. And then also, that's also one of the suggestions of integrating the content. You can say the educational content that's to be taught into the tab itself, which is not done. I think those should be integrated. They are still separate, the YouTube and the tab that is given. So these are things which need a very close monitoring, and it's no point just spending money and saying that this we have given so much of facilities made for the children. So what I suggest is one, as Dr. Binod has also said, that there has to be a hybrid approach. We need to, if we go back to the details, so 1.4 billion people, if that's the population, according to the figures, 900 million have internet connections. That's the official figures. Then straight away 500 million people have no internet at all in the country. So that's the scene. So if we have already built, say, analog, the traditional media platforms, why don't we find a scheme to integrate one with the other? That is something which is very important. And then we will have to sort of create a scheme to tackle the distrust this media technology has already been trying to instill through, say, the social media and the digital media, if we put it that way, that people have started disbelieving for the disinformation that is given. So we have to find a way, just like, how to tackle hate speech and others, we need to find out that we have to stop the propaganda that is promoted, and that is motivationally done by certain political parties and their agents. So that has to stop, or we have to have a movement to be able to stop that propaganda element. So that's one element that we have to think. So that's one of the ways in which we can rebuild the trust. These are social issues. Rebuild the trust in media technology, whether it is digital or the analog. That's very important for us to have it in operation. Then I've already said that the community radio, the other schemes that's there, that can also be integrated. Then the digital literacy, that is also something which has to be looked into. My whole point comes down to one area which saying we need a single monitoring system, not surveillance, please. Not surveillance. We need a monitoring system of how these schemes, even the government's, I take it that they are done with good intentions, that how it is operating at the ground level. Because at any ground level survey will disclose lots of problems, biases, and then misinformation, then fears like losing jobs, digital losing, replacing the human element in teaching. So these are the things which we will need to look into in future and in very near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dasgupta. And finally, Dr. Kulveen Trihan, Senior Faculty at the University School of Mass Communication in Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha, I hope I pronounced it correctly, University Government of NCT of Delhi.
will do. This will do? Yeah. Right. So, a lot of conversations on digital exclusion, conversations on algorithmic bias, concerns on intersectionality and its relationship with digital divide, digital inequality, and overall more comprehensive, a more holistic approach to inequality is the view of the panel today. To be honest, this panel or this plenary will always remain special because this also comes 6 months after the book on digital inequalities in media education, consequences of COVID-19, and why it is special because we are focusing a lot on digital inequality, but three of us, that is Padma, who's not here today, Padma Rani, my co-editor, along with Dr. Bhanu Bhaktacharya from University of Ottawa. Three of us, when we were meeting for the last 12, 13 years, anywhere and everywhere in the world in the digital divide working groups, in various conferences on media literacy, we were passionately talking about the outcomes, the impressions, our works on a post-industrial revolution 4.0, which looks at increasing digital footprints in network connectivity, which looks at big data, looks at artificial intelligence and cloud computing in everyday lives of the people. So from there, the idea of digital inequality, was born, and we started working on it, and the pandemic really hastened our process of work and made us focus on it. We focused on South Asia, the entire region, because today's panel is dedicated to digital inequalities in South Asia. So that too needs to be factored in. Much of the conversation, and that is quite reasonable, is coming out of examples from India, right? But there are very interesting facets from Afghanistan when we look at why and how digital inequalities exasperate, they increase, or at times do not show any conflagration due to perhaps change in political regimes, or how Ulama Iqbal's religious ideological understanding of education can be contextualized vis-a-vis second layer of digital divide in Pakistan. When we look at the happiness index in Bhutan and try to figure out the levels of digital divide and how there is no such binary as haves and have-nots, which of course any conversation of digital divide began with a Marxian binary of haves and have-nots, but has now become a continuum of positional and categorical inequalities, some of which Moshmi pointed out in terms of intersectionality of caste. Not just our book, also through empirical works, country-specific studies, critical reflections, also notes that it's not just caste, it is region, very interesting regional dynamics, very interesting linguistic barriers which play a role in creating either digital distraction or digital exclusion or other peripheral antecedents and anchors in this center and peripheral relationship within the digital ecosystems. So while we are trying to understand who owns, how's the digital ecosystem manifesting in health, in education, in other spheres of life, and how so many of us are reflective about ethnocentrism, technocentrism, technological determinism, and that we are all trying to move towards technological rationalism. We're trying to understand that while technology is here to stay, and that, like Professor Burshova was saying, that it is a part of our lives which we acknowledge, but we need to critically reflect on. We need to look at not just the kind of inequalities which are exasperated, but what are those mediating factors? One of the empirical researches in our book reveals that one of the primary mediating factor may not be a cultural variable. It may be prior experience with that particular technology at one point in time that creates technology acceptance or technology dissociation. That on one side, age plays an important role as a social construct in UTaught, in unified acceptance of technology and its adoption. But senior citizens, which we call it Gen S, are using technology, are excited to technology, you provide them with skilling, reskilling, and the patience to impart digital prudence. So the questions which have been raised here with regards to every technology of all times, electronic communications, mediation of all spaces, have been grappling with these questions of surveillance, electronic surveillance, of capitalism, of capitalistic imperialism, of neoliberal regimes, and we'll continue to revisit digital divides in line with those thoughts. But along with that, we need, because digital is here to stay, so within that space, we have to create digital prudence. What the book also leads us is towards that, we have a choice. We can use digital technologies to amplify democratic processes or to detour them, right? We need to understand and create more digitally supportive groups, a supportive system which is not necessarily state-funded, which is outside of state, needs to come up, and it is coming up in many ways, right? To create alternative spaces where digital can be used to provide voice to the voiceless. And that has been happening at various levels, at more hyper-local levels as of now. In our context of media education, what we've seen is that, in the hinterland, in spaces which were far away from network connectivity, in countries like Bangladesh, in countries like Pakistan, and those Afghanistan, those countries were ranked low on network connectivity and speed. This first level of digital device was extensive. Second level of digital device, which is about skilling, which is about acknowledgement and willingness of technological literacies and digital literacies, was something that was very interesting, wherein various other factors also played a role in terms of cognitive consistencies or preconceived notions you have with regards to use of technology. Another very important facet which we need to factor in is, in the technology gap or the digital divide which we are talking about, is when we are dealing with a particular age group, like let's say young adults, or for that matter even to some extent with older adults, then we need to have different ways of looking at TAM, that is technology acceptance measurement, because their behavioral intention, their perceived usefulness of a particular technology supersedes availability, access, and the affordances which can be leveraged in terms of benefiting a particular social system. So those are the things which we need to look at. And third level of digital divide is also now being visible in terms of digital distraction, which is again exacerbating the inequalities. So inequalities prevail in the region. Inequalities also prevail between the three big ones, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, in terms of population, the density of population, in terms of network speed, and people who have the digital access, against Sri Lanka, Nepal, and the smaller ones like Maldives and Bhutan. For that matter, Maldives has great network connectivity, but their digital skilling levels are low, right? So we need to look at the South Asian region, its diversity, assimilative cultural diversity, their shared histories, factor in the social facets. When we are teaching, digital cultures, when we are teaching digital to our students, it is very important to introduce the concept of inequality as a continuum and not as a binary to all of them, number one. Number two, rooted aspects of socio-culture, socio-technological, socio-psychological aspects need to be brought in while discussing digital inclusion, exclusion, distraction, and inequality. I leave it here, and then we can take it in the form of questions. By the way, this is the book we had come out with, and there are 8 different empirical researches from 8 nations.
right on time. All right, thank you so much. Again, for highlighting the fact that, you know, digital inclusion is a multi-layer phenomena. And we're here to discuss the various layers of digital inclusion and inequality. We have another half an hour, so let's open the floor for questions.
Thank you. My name is Shashi Nanjundaya. I'm from Mahindra University in Hyderabad. Thank you for such a wonderful invocation of the issues in digital inclusion. I wanted to basically make a comment and then a question in terms of what inclusion and exclusion might mean. For example, in terms of technology adoption, but not just technology adoption. There's a kind of inevitability about the adoption today, and that's okay. So we didn't have that same inevitability when the internet was introduced. It was rather controlled, and it was released in a way so as to almost seep in to through the society with a certain care. Now, so the one word that none of you used, thankfully, was the word disruption, because technology and disruption seem to somehow go together. And it seems that suddenly everything is always disrupted by technology. But that stands in the face of human evolution. So there is a revolution that technocrats will always claim that it's going to include everybody, it's going to democratize everything. And then there is the human evolution that struggles to catch up with the kind of technology that's been literally imposed upon them. My question, therefore, is what is the role of governments in this entire circus of inclusion and exclusion, of revolution and evolution, and disruption versus continuity? Do governments have some kind of responsibility of not being disruptive themselves, not falling for the disruption themselves, but stand for continuity?
I think that Professor Trehan actually did use the word disruption.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I did hear that.
Revolution, yeah.
So maybe you want to answer?
So yeah, Shashi, we've been using this word technological disruption or disruption in many ways. And yes, it at times bothers me as well. That is why we refrain. When it comes to whether the government has a role, it is very interesting because government has a role. However, the minute I suggest that there is a role by the government, I'm concerned. Because then that would lead me to deeply think what kind of government, which formation, how will it manifest. So otherwise, like for instance, I was talking about diversity of language. Language being reflected as one of the major barriers which exasperates or increases the divides. So yes, whenever conditional approvals are given to various platforms, and we've discussed platforms here, approvals are given to different platforms to bring in their applications for digital purposes of various kinds. Government can have a prototype in terms of how different languages need to be included. It needs to be introduced not just in 4 to 5 languages, which at the moment is almost a reality. It needs to include all the 52, 53 languages, if not all the dialects here. However, I'm not very comfortable with government coming in. The minute you allow government coming in, they'll come up with something called as the draft of Digital Media Regulation Bill 2021. So not so sure at the moment. We're still thinking.
Yeah,
let's make public more digitally prudent at the moment.
Yeah. So because I was coming from the AI point of view, which seems to be now the disruptive technology, not so much the social media. It seems passé already, right? So
Government too is almost unsure on AI at the moment.
Hi, thank you, professors, for really rich talk on digital inclusion. I'm Abza Bharadwaj, and I'm a final year PhD scholar at University of Queensland and IIT Delhi. My question / reflection is directed towards Professor Moismi. You spoke of co-production of knowledge, and it's a methods sort of question. So when we are sort of studying the digital or studying the digital subjects, you brushed upon something called like co-production, or exploring the intersubjectivity between the researcher and the researched. So here, how does the politics of representation sort of play out in this context? Because we are always sort of trying to have a perspective from below, but still, in many ways, looking from top to bottom. So, like, these are just questions that that we might be able to raise, but do we actually find a solution to something like this? Because, like, I'm sure, like, many sociologists working, like Mahua Bandyopadhyay, they have talked about plurality and looking like at more heterogeneous ways of producing knowledge. But how do we really decenter the field? Yeah, I just wanted to know your thoughts on this.
Your core question is how actually politics of representation works here, right? And if we are actually co-creating knowledge. So I actually tried to refer, actually I took a cue from the morning discussion. So when we were discussing about community communication. And the kind of research we are trying to do, as most of the speakers, we talked about digital inclusion, exclusion. So it was like, as I said, that initially when I'm just explaining our work there. So, and what you said is that we always try to look from the top-down approach, and exactly the way we did, like we initially thought about how we will go about that digital literacy program. And we select, by the way, we selected one village there. And in that way also, a kind of politics of representation actually starts from there. The way we start selecting our, I'm talking about from top-down approach. So anyway, so when we thought about that village, and we collected data about the villagers, and we spoke to the panchayat. Since the day we started discussing with the panchayat, so we somehow felt that they wanted us to include a few people, and they were not that interested about everyone in the villages, right? So we could understand the reason. Anyway, somehow we tried to convince them. So another thing is there. So from grassroots level, it happens. After that, when we talked about, that's a very Brahman-dominated village, by the way. So but the Panchayat Pradhan was a Muslim. So very interesting combination. So somehow we could include everyone there. But yes, when we were framing the questions, and when we went there with our students for the master's semester 4, so it was, as I told, that the entire thing was totally different for us. Like, we initially thought about digital literacy, meaning we thought that we should tell them about basically the digital frauds and the government schemes they can avail. But then we found that actually we cannot do this. Because first thing first, there are people, and majority, so we divided in 3 groups later, that they didn't even touch the device once. So in that way, the entire, and it happened after 2-3 visits, we understood that, and it took 2 more visits for us to actually understand what to do, right? So in that way, we changed entire our process. The entire methodology we changed. But then again, interventions were there from the panchayat. So you are doing this, fine, but try to include these people and please try to exclude these people, which was not possible for us because that was a university project, we told them. The most important part is that when we completed the study and we are trying to approach the district administration for this, so that we can actually go for other villages and other blocks, then they said, okay, you have sent it to us, no problem, we will look into this. We will tell you where to go, which we never wanted. So you can see the layers of this thing, what you wanted to say. But then yes, it's a very, very, very normal student-centric outreach program. So if such program, such project faces this kind of challenges, so you can understand what happens. And in a way, in fact, I think Kulvin can answer this well, is because she has already worked on a book project on this. Maybe a lot of issues came up like this. But in a very micro, hyper-local level, we are facing such things. And of course, I would like to mention one thing here. I don't know whether you all will agree with this on my point. If we are sending proposals for digital inclusion exclusion to do the ICSSR projects and all, I don't know how many you have faced this. It starts, if you are not mentioning few keywords, your projects are totally disregarded. But if you are selectively, if you can give some words, I do not want to mention the words right now, your projects are getting immediately accepted. So you can understand it very well.
Just to add to Moshmi's point, I'm already working on a digital media literacy project with ICSSR, and I would please encourage everyone to work with diverse organizations, and it is not important to just go in for funded research projects. I don't know why this has become such a norm in this country at the moment. Voluntary projects, individual researchers contribute equally or more so in this particular field of digital, I would say exclusion and not inclusion repeatedly, either inequality or exclusion. Inclusion to me at the moment is a dream. I'm trying to, achieve.
And such realities are coming. Actually, ours one is not funded by anyone. Individual, absolutely individual initiative and all. So for such projects, actually, we can see the realities more. And she is absolutely right about it.
Hi, so Dr. Amreen Mogar here from Guru Nanak College, Mumbai. So absolutely bold thoughts. I mean, it was a leisure listening to you all. And one such initiative, outreach program that I have initiated, and I'm trying to work with an NGO in a tribal village. So right now what you were narrating, Moshmi ma'am, is totally a reality. They wouldn't let us go in for making documentaries. So anything on video was disregarded. But nevertheless, I feel, taking PG students there, again, is something at a later level. So I feel, intervention a little bit earlier to media students would do much more good, or I don't know, I mean, you're the best people to tell me. I would want to know that how this, this entire social change that we are talking about and using communication for it brought a lot of interest to me because, in one such donation drive activities, I asked one child who did not even know Hindi, so I had to communicate through Marathi with someone else. I asked, do you want to study? Do you go to school? It was a tribal child. And he said, no, why should I go to school? At that time, it struck me that there is no aspiration. So that's how, maybe when you were just now talking about how more and more leaders need to emerge from the SC and the ST and the OBC communities, and how important it becomes. So here my question to you is, when Dr. Kulwin, you say that how we can create an alternative space. So yes, with dialogue, we are doing it, but at the grassroots level, how this can be achieved, I would really love to know and, take it further. Thank you.
Can I be honest with you? If you can also, along with getting your proposals approved, working hard on them, persuade the funding agencies that leave the digital devices behind. When the project finishes, you take back the digital device, which you had used to train them, whatever it is, and that disrupts the entire process of social change. If you leave the devices, I remember fighting very passionately when I was presenting my research proposal to the funder, that 125 devices have to be left behind for these adolescent girls. Otherwise, you can cut any other slab of my money. Don't give me X, don't give me Y, but give me this. I don't think they agreed to all of it, but some of it was given. So we need to then, this whole process of creating digital citizenship, if there is any such thing, has to be seen very holistically and as an enduring, as a consistent, ongoing process. It cannot be a point-in-time exercise. It is a period in time. On all of us also, when we're working with the community, let's not disown the community once our fieldwork is done. Let's continue to be with them in almost the same relationship, if possible. That is where digital helps. When we came back from Rajasthan, as a government university teacher, I don't get as much chutti, as much leave. So what, this digital device, this mobile phone has really helped me. Those girls are connected with me even now. After the project ended in 2022, we have a Bug gang where they raise all the questions all the time. Yeah.
I want to mention one point here. We started the program with 51 villages. Then suddenly we saw that for first 2 weeks they were coming. Suddenly the number got dropped. Then we obviously started, the students, they started inquiring. They gained that caste system. The few Brahman families, they never wanted their family members to sit with you can understand what happened. So they got dropped. So that was one fine. I think this is very common also, very common. So in that way, we had to convince the opinion leader out there, school teacher. So then he helped us again. So that is something very important also, to go to the opinion leaders in the village, or maybe training the trainers who can, maybe separately they will. Our goal was to, give the idea of digital literacy to the entire village. Not obviously, we never wanted any kind of segregation or division. So we had to form 4 or 5 groups also. Just obviously, we had to honor their cultural norm and all, so that we can actually do our duty. So that, I think many of us, we face these issues also.
Hello, I'm Padma Kumar. I work as a faculty here at Manipal Institute of Communication. So it was a very enriching session with a lot of insights about digital inclusion and exclusion. So this question is to Kulween, because she's already working on that, digital inequalities, and also she brought this language aspect there. So in India, we have a lot of regional apps that helps in digital inclusion, right? Especially in Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, and Telugu and all, you have a lot of apps. But if you look at it, most of these apps, some of the lexicon that they use, that are being used on these apps, are not hyper-localistic. The lexicon is very, very technical. These are technical jargons that are being used. I feel somewhere that these technical jargons are not including people, they are rather pushing people away from these digital spaces, especially the apps, because I feel when a lot of, when we talk about hyper-localism, we also have to understand that it is actually normalizing, right? So we get to hear the same elitist language on these apps also, right? Sometimes, like in few examples in Tamil, in some of the apps that they use, it's very, very difficult for a person to understand what it means, So you have anything to comment about this, Kulbi?
Absolutely, Padma. In fact, when Shashi was raising the point of AI and AI literacies, one of the major points of emphasis is who's training these models, right? They're engineers, of course, at various IITs. Mohan was talking about his stint there, right? So they are doing it. They're training the AI models. I think you and I, people from applied social sciences, from history, from economics, from sociology, need to be part of those teams which are training these AI models. That is where, when these large language models will be trained in terms of conversational hyper-local dialect. That is where this whole concept of a digital dost, digital didi, digital agony aunt, digital consultant will really work. Otherwise, they are mere virtual influencers or chatbots which are promoting the gap between the elite and the plebeian.
If I may, I do not want to ask a question, but just to add to what Dr. Vinod shared. I am associated with an NGO, and we were once approached by a tribal school near Thane, saying that we need to create email IDs of all the students because the admission procedure after 11th is online and they need email addresses, everybody. So it was a huge task spread over 2-3 days because the kids did not have a phone at home. The school had very limited number of computers. So we had to create a schedule and create an email ID for each student. But we could, though we did that, we kept thinking about the subsequent difficulties. If they are informed by email about the further procedure, then how difficult it is going to be. So what you talked about, the hybrid facilities, is definitely highlighted. I just wanted to share that, which is a reality everywhere. Even in an urban school, the teacher has to fill the exam form of each and every student on their own because the students don't have access. So it's added burden. Earlier, pen and paper, the children could do it, but now it's added burden because there are very limited number of devices and facilities that are available. So.
I think there was a concept of Sahayaks earlier, if you remember. Whenever a new scheme was introduced, there'll be someone to hold hand. Ever since this whole, digital footprint has expanded beyond containment.
You're left on your own now.
Yeah, you're left on
You're expected to know everything and have the wherewithal to do it.
Have to be,
yeah, but it doesn't happen.
More robust.
All right, seems like we're done and we're heading for lunch. Thank you very much for the audience for great questions and of course for the presenters for a wonderful panel. Enjoy lunch and thank you very much.